You good to go? Namae Harimai, welcome to the resumption of the deliberations on our long-term plan. No to apologies. We are still short of Phil Morrison. Would somebody like to move this apology to be accepted? Moved and seconded. All in favour will say aye. Aye. And without further ado, I think we can resume. So I'll hand over to Wilma and Rachel to lead us into these deliberations this morning.
Thank you. So, thank you, Chair. I think if General Manager Strategy could perhaps lead through with a summary of how we finished last week and the matters that we come back to discuss today, which includes bringing back the responses to the Council's directions from that meeting, and also the other matters and recommendations from the paper for the last week's meeting. So, Rach.
Thank you. So as councillors will recall, the deliberations last Wednesday were really focused in two key areas. One around proposed budget changes in response to submitted concerns regarding affordability. And the second part of the discussions last Wednesday were around the way council rates and how to respond to submitted concerns in that space. You gave us a number of directives, and in particular there was a request to look at more use of reserves to offset rates increases. So the paper, supplementary paper that went out on Friday, contains some information regarding that, in particular increased use of leased area reserves, increased use of biosecurity and land sustainability accumulated surpluses, some adjustments to the asset reserves, and some further information around what the implications of each of those options were and things that you might want to take into consideration when making decisions around reserve use. There's also a recommendation to undertake a full review of the use of reserves during the next financial year, dealing with matters like minimum reserve balances, clarification of the relationship between the various reserve policies, because you'll be aware that there's the new reserve policy plus the existing lease area policy. Clarification that reserves should only be used in the area that they were generated, and a determination of the approach to asset reserves, which includes matters such as funding of the depreciation of long-term assets, that kind of thing. So we'll come back to that shortly. But through you, Chair, I'd like to suggest in terms of process that the Council consider recommendation, which is to receive this report, and then that we come back to recommendations 2 onwards later in the day once you've had a chance to consider the additional information that's been put before you.
Thanks for that, Rachel. John, you happy to move? Seconded by Lyndall. Any discussion? I'll put that motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye.
And so, through you, Chair, one of the first things we wanted to present this morning, just before we go into the budget adjustments, was some detail around the submission analytics. So you might recall we discussed previously, giving you some idea of the percentages of those in support and opposition, and perhaps trying to match that with geographical location. So David, the Strategy and Partnership Manager, has got some information if Council would like to hear that now, and then we can get into the rest of the discussions.
Yep, fine.
Kia ora, everybody. Join the Zoom. Just need to quickly join. Apologies for that. So we had a look at a bit of the, it's not great to see it, but so we started off with looking at the first option, which was the long-term plan option, around the $2.3 million budget increase, and giving you an overall perspective out of all of the 329 submissions, the percentages that supported. We didn't, that opposed, there was some partial support, so that was coded that by those who suggested that if the money was used well, that they would support it. If they could see a difference, they would support it. So that came into partial, and then for a number we didn't have any response at all, so no response. So it starts to give you a clear indication of what it was that people thought. Further delving down into those who did respond, so just took out those no responses to this question because some submissions came through and only submitted on other issues. One of those in particular was the targeted rabbit control rate as an example of those who only submitted on a particular issue. So again, you can see the overwhelming opposition, and further looking into the commentary of that, the majority of those were all around the affordability, which is what you heard coming through and what has been discussed around the table. So it's no surprises in that space. From a capital value perspective, and this was specifically looking at the question of the targeted rates of the land sustainability and biodiversity rates going from a land value to a capital value perspective. Again, this is the total. So out of those who responded, you can see that actually for this question there was a really big drop-off of those who actually responded to it. The primary responses were in that budget space, so 73% didn't respond to this question. Further into those who actually did, again you're getting into a supportive 19%, those who were no was 72%, and a partial of 9%. There were a range of comments on this. Those who didn't support it, one of the key ones coming through was that they didn't believe that the suggestion was that CV didn't accurately reflect a fair and equal way to be rating. And there are a number of comments around how does rating on a building have anything to do with the environment and our work. So that was a couple of the key things that came through from that. When we get into the regionalising rates question, so this was moving from 140 rates to 1 and looking at it across the region. Again, further in we got, the less responses we got. So hitting at 81% no response. But then coming through for those who did, again, the majority were a no. But it was interesting to see the slight change in those who did respond, that there was slightly more support as we went through to the regionalising, or moving from 140 to 1. The question around where did submissions come from? This was a little bit, what we need to be mindful and note in this space is the fact that out of the 329 submissions, we only had accurate location information for 119 of those. So roughly a third. So we need to keep that in mind as we go through this information, and it makes it really difficult to make any correlations with any of the other information that we have. So this is your general, I know there's a lot going on here. It starts to give you a sense of where they've come from in terms of location.
You got a question, Julie?
Just quickly, just the Otau, that's not about the petitions.
No. So this hasn't. So these responses have not taken the submission was taken as one. Or that was a one submission. There were 750 in support people who signed that petition. Further breaking that into, I guess this is the piece that makes it more relevant from a constituency point of view. So you can see the overwhelming response from Western. So this is out of the 119 submissions that we had location information for, they're accurate enough to be able to pinpoint. 45% coming from Western, 18, well, you can read that. I have done an analysis of what this looks like against what the normal populations are of these areas. And I just haven't pulled that particular graph, into this, but I can get that for you guys after the break to put this side by side so that you can actually see the difference. Going down a little bit further, this one, again, got to think about what's the correlation in regard to this. So this is putting together where people came from, or where the locations of submitters in regard to their constituency, to those who supported, opposed, or were in partial support. So again, you can see the overwhelming, or the majority are a no. What you tend to see is that across the board, there is opposition, but again, we can't really draw too much from this, given that only 119 submissions get location information. But it just starts to give you a little bit of idea about what the spread is. So it says budget, but it actually means it didn't update. Anyway, sorry. Moving on to regionalising of rates. So this one is taking the 140 down to 1. Much less response rate, as you can see, and across the board things come together a little bit more in terms of support versus opposition, as you can see from that pie graph earlier. But generally, there's a pretty even spread across the district of opposition. Heading into now, the only other real consultation that had any data of significance to present was the targeted rabbit control rate, and this gives you a significant idea of the majority who supported that rate. So that came through in the submissions.
Right, I've got Eric, then Peter.
Yeah, well, Pete, that's very useful breakdown, but what I'm also interested in is the substance of the argument as to why people were for or against, as well as the numbers, because sometimes people's reaction to change is just no. And have we done any work on just trying to get to the balance of the argument rather than the numbers of the argument?
So we started that. With the number of submissions, it's a pretty big task to get through all those comments to do it, but we're about 3/4 of the way through there.
Okay. Peter.
Yeah, look, I think this is really valuable, because what struck me here when people come in to talk to us is that you don't know us. So this is all part of the package of getting to know the constituents better, and this helps us. Yeah, just pick up on Eric's point too. So people will come quite freely to tell you what is wrong, as opposed to telling you what they like. Some people will support things, but most people will be negative on the submission. And that's understandable. That's just the way we are. That's really hard. So that will show up. That seems to be showing up quite clearly there. I don't know what we do about that. How we get around that, but I know the direction of travel we're going with this. Anyway, so really good.
John.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. I was wanting that for some time, so that's great. A question around the rabbit control. Was that all the no's in there? Just my point being that a majority that were against it probably hadn't read the policy and didn't understand it. So where do you go with that if they're not actually feeding back on the information that's being supplied?
Yeah, so I did a little bit more analysis of location data for that targeted rabbit control rate yesterday, and what it was showing was there weren't that many no's that actually outright said no,
yeah,
but there were comments made in reference to have never seen pest control, I don't have anything happening with my land. 5 out of 6 of those comments around no didn't live within the
Yes,
rabbit
that's
control
correct.
area.
Alistair, then Paul.
I think John stole my thunder. Thank you, John.
It's my area, mate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a number of concerns from some of those around about the affordability. There was a number of those people that spoke about the affordability and questioning the operational efficiency of the organisation and improvements within that to try and lower the rates. But there was nothing in that pie graph relating to that.
No, that's the further analysis. We've got through about 3/4. We're having to read through all the comments to then ascertain what that end looks like. So,
Well, that we did too. Should put that in there, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Morris, then myself. Morris.
Well, as far as analysing the credibility of the submissions, I think that's our job.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that's what we should have read all the submissions and judged them on their merits and decided whether or not they provided a rational argument. So that's an important job for us to do.
I agree.
And if you're following on from that, at the end of the day, we weigh up the submissions on the value. It's not so much about numbers. And, you can see there was some leaflets put out which may have been well-intentioned, but there was some inaccuracies in that did cause quite a jump in those various areas. But all in all, we've had more submissions than we normally have by a long way, and that's always a good thing that people are engaged. But at the end of the day, when we deliberate, we look at the way things are on the logic going forward. Any further questions on that?
I'd just like to say, all I do is agree with that. Any supporting information we have to make better decisions is welcome. And I'd like to see that work built on through long-term plans and the work that we do. Any information we can collect to know our constituents better, I think it's only of value. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks for that. That was interesting. Right, we're moving to Tania.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't see any value. I guess what we
And that.
Good morning. I've loaded this not so that you could try and read it from the screen, but if you could perhaps follow me. I understand you have copies printed and on Connect. Yes. It's my laptop again. Sure it is. So Chair, I want to take you through the information that was sent to councillors as a follow-up from the deliberations last week. Councillors expressed concern over the building of reserves at a time when ratepayers are facing difficult economic circumstances. Staff undertook to review again all reserves and their use throughout the LTP. Recommendations we made to use reserves versus debt for some of the proposed capital purchases. This is the capital that is not the infrastructure. So this is our vehicles and science equipment, etc. And IT. So I'll start again. Decisions were made or recommendations were made to use asset reserves for some of those proposed purchases to reduce depreciation where it was considered prudent and delay expenditure where possible. So in particular, we looked at our Iris Next Gen investment. It was $1 million transformation reserve sitting there to be used. We're proposing to use it in future for the implementation of that reserve. The recommendation is that we absorb that Iris Next Gen into that reserve in the first 3 years. We reviewed our vehicle purchases. We looked at re-looked at our asset purchase cost versus our last cost under the all of government contract. We looked at our science expenditure again and the timing of that. And we looked again at the culverts and the sundry infrastructure that it sits alongside the climate resilience expenditure. Then we went and looked at the leasehold reserves. We looked at the surpluses. The outcome is the reduction in rates of 2.2 million over the first 3 years, with an overall reduction in rates over 10 years of 7.4 million. The total of 3.8 million of reserves and surpluses has been added to the budgets as funding for everyday activities of biosecurity, land sustainability and flood bank repairs since consultation. Proposed to be added, I should say, as per this recommendation here. $2.5 million of reserves have been added in as funding since the deliberation meeting. The remaining balances at June, the forecast balances at June 2030 will be land sustainability 618,000, biosecurity 617,000, and leasehold reserves 6,200,000. What we have in front of you here, Chair, then is the result of this. And I'm not going to go through it in detail, but we have to our far right the original numbers as per the consultation document. In the middle, 3 columns, the information that you were given at the deliberation meeting last week, and into the far left, updated information that reflects the use of those reserves, both reduction of the funding and reduction of depreciation and interest costs. Highlighted in pink then are the effective rate changes that come from those proposed changes and adjustments. You'll see year 1, 13.4, and years 2 and 3, 12.9. The total amount of rates changed in years 1, 2 and 3, in the middle here, $2.495 million of rates has been reduced from the budget in year 1, 2.241 year 2, and 2.5 in year 3. So substantial reduction in rates as a result of proposed changes since the consultation information was produced. Before I go any further into that, Chair, is there any questions? Are we allowed to ask questions at this point?
I've got John, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Jeremy. Thank you, Tony. I just, I see, so the post-liberation balances for reserves, 2024, 2025, there's about 700K difference. And then we've only seen a 0.1% drop on rate pay for 2024, 25. Is that a hangover from this year? Or? Sorry, I just thought I thought it would have, I had to a bigger drop. That was why not taking the 700 building reserves.
I'm trying to share that. Let me catch up with you.
I just didn't think that thing. I'm sorry.
Can we jump to that?
Yep, sorry.
I appreciate that. On this particular page here, is there any other questions? We're going to go straight to the reserves balance.
I was just, as I've stated before, an A-1 column of last year's figure for operating revenue and expenditure to base that on, because there's a huge list from last year's to this column B. So, which leads me to believe that column C and column D won't end up like that at all. Because there's been a massive lift from 45.8 million dollars to 51.152. I mean, to think that the year later we're going to keep it within $1 million.
You would respond to that at all?
That's for the chief executive. I can produce information, it is publicly available. Certainly did not put it in any reason except we're focused on these 3 years. The information that went out did have prior year with it, so I apologise, I can certainly add that in.
Jeremy, then myself.
Just in all those, you were saying you went through the asset reserves and that, yes. We've got totals, but just give me where those adjustments have been made. Like we've got a total there.
Yeah.
But specifically where they are, you talk about your vehicles, things. I'm just saying where they are and what, where they come from, rather than just, they're under the assets.
Yeah. I will, if I can, Chair, discuss the total and then I can answer councillors' questions. So this, Chief, is also in your documents. My understanding of the instruction from council at the deliberations was that we were looking to not build or overly build reserves in those first few years. What we have here in year, we have two lots of information, the information that came out in the repeat of information from the consultation document, which showed reserves in year 1 of 31.4, 33 building to 34.9 and ending up 10 years at 51. We have, through these proposed changes, 29.7 in year 1, 29.3 and 29.2. At the same time, we've been able to maintain a small increase in the general reserve of $1 million over those 3 years. The leasehold reserves have moved down from forecast opening balance of 7.6 to 6 million at year 3. The lowest point being year 4, and then slowly rebuilding. This Chair, there's still a surplus, a small surplus each year forecast in the leasehold property after the funding of assets. There'll be a surplus of around 200,000, increasing with inflation. So there will be an ability to rebuild here. The river and drainage district reserves are not moving. The targeted reserves for land and land sus and biosecurity, you can see, are moving down again over the first 3 or 4 years. Disaster reserves increase, still not being touched, still increased by the interest and inflation. Asset reserves are the other area where we've made changes, and no changes were made deliberately to the other reserves. There are tiny movements you might have noticed, and if you were looking at that individually, you might have seen a $30,000 movement here or there by the end of year 10. That's simply a reflection of the change in overheads. As we've reduced the costs, some of these costs, IT costs, that flows out to the whole of the organisation, and that will trickle down into here, and you see some of those tiny movements. So the question, if I could answer the questions in reverse order, the question for around assets. So there was a reduction there of $1 million by the use of the transformation reserve for IT. There is a reduction of $1 million over 10 years, $1 million plus inflation, in the infrastructure reserve for structural assets. So that culverts and such, the program we had there, we had $350,000 a year for 10 years. rechecked in with Randall about that and looked at where we're at with that work program. We have changed that to 250,000 a year for 10 years to be funded from the infrastructure reserve. The other changes were in the science area. The science reviewed the timing of their expenditure. There was a reasonable amount of their overall 10-year program was in the first 2 or 3 years. We've looked at that again and see if they can spread that a little bit more and fund that through their science, the plant and equipment reserve. So minor changes in context of the 10 years and the total amount of millions, but actually significant in terms of accumulated depreciation and interest costs. It has made significant changes over the period. Now, the offsetting to that is the fact that the funds will be used from the reserves, so there's a loss of potential income from reserves as well. So I'm happy to share with you a summary note. The savings and debt repayments are 3.2 million over 10 years. Saving and interest costs 2.2 million. Reduction in depreciation is 1.7 million. And then there was offset loss of income from the use of the reserves and increased OPEX through reanalysis of some of the expenditure. For example, inventory, we forecast to spend several $100,000 each 3 years to update the aerial photography. We've moved that into OPEX away from CAPEX, given it's such a short life asset. So some of those changes offset each other. So what I've just read out to you, the net effect and the net benefit of that is 4.9 million over 10 years. In addition, we've added the use of additional reserves as requested by councillors, 2.5 million. The total rate reduction over 10 years is 7.4 million. And Councillor Pemberton's question was, sorry.
Yeah, so, and sorry, it's just pretty crude math. When you take the 700,000 reduction in reserves, so we've used
Sorry, which year, Councillor?
20 on the table, compare the reserves table 20 year 25 to 25, with the $700,000 less than the new proposed.
25 from the top table to the bottom table.
Yeah, from between here and here. Here and here, the 700,000 is put into reserves from rates, is that correct?
What's it about?
331,456 minus 29,752.
Where are we looking?
Which table?
Between those.
Which one?
The post hearings reserve balance and post deliberations balance, yeah.
Year one, I've got 25, I've got 31.4. Is that one?
Yeah, and then 29.775. Is that 700?
Roughly.
My maths can work
Yeah, I
out.
think it's 1.7. The difference. between-
1.7, is it?
Yeah.
So we relate that back to, I'm just trying to, the updated,
Yes.
the updated rate amount for 2025 from 13.5 to 13.4. I thought it might have more influence. I thought it would have more influence on the rate. That's all. Sorry.
So that's, no, I understand now.
Yeah, sorry.
So, no, lots of numbers. So the top table here is actually the consultation one.
Yeah.
So the 1.7 is the move between the first lot of numbers
Okay.
and the second lot. We had the option of putting in the third and middle one, which is what we're suggesting. And we didn't. So that was from March to now.
Okay.
Yeah. So the changes in year one have been insignificant, as you can say, is point. Yeah. What if I could go to this other table? I think this has been handed out as a supplementary. So this is a reflection of what we were working on at the end of the deliberations. This shows, so to the left, council, is what we came to the council with in the first deliberation. Proposed rates, reserve usage of 900 and 400 equaling 1.35 over the period of 3 years. What we've come back with now following that meeting is proposed reserve usage of 4.6. Year 1 has changed very little. Years 2 and 3 and 4 significant changes. And those significant changes reflect the significant changes in years 2 and 3 in the financials that we've looked at prior. What is important with this table, Chair, is understanding the minimum balances. So the leasehold reserves have within their policy a minimum balance determined by the working party at the time of 1.4 million. So at the lowest point, we are 5 million, 4.4 million above there. So I'll put that there for your reference to understand what we're working towards.
But while we're on the reserves, Tanya, some of the direction the other day was perhaps in the general reserve actually not doing it in the first 2 years. I see we've still got the $500,000 there. I guess the argument was if you put away money for a rainy day and it's already raining, that we did have a conversation about perhaps not starting that for the first couple of years, but I see it's still there at this stage.
There was a few instructions, Chair. I was looking very particularly at trying to keep those original reserves no higher, and I managed to achieve that without using the general reserve. I will leave it with the councillors to decide if that's sufficient.
Jeremy.
Just on that, I'll bring back the local government funding in regards to the reserves, that we have a different form of funding for those rainy days. So effectively, we could be changing our business as usual on what reserves are there for. So we need to make a call on, do we hold this money, take it from the community and hold it as a bank? Whereas we've actually got a facility with, if we need 5 million, 10 million or something disasters on that day, we can call it in. We can borrow the money, which is basically the same as what taking it out of the community, but we don't have to take it out of the community at the moment. So I really challenge the council. I need to understand why we, being a bank for the community, when we've created a good facility to get funds on those days for those rainy days. Because you're double dipping at the moment. Well, we are. I should say we are, in principle, because we've changed. We've got a different form of funding.
John.
Could I just add to what Jeremy's saying? I think it's more an understanding. I'm looking for what is the vulnerability of those external policies that we are looking for borrowings. What is the vulnerability we have there, which will then steer how much reserves we need to have in such like the disaster fund. Is there any advice we can take on that?
The recommendation to council is to continue the direction of the reserves. We started studying the reserves and we're going to come back as a group and understand these questions. They're not simple questions. The total probable loss in a disaster is a specialist area that we were going to seek advice from for councillors and bring that back. Recommendation, I believe, in the agenda here suggests the use of reserves for the first year of the LTP, and that councillors come back to this very discussion for reconsideration in the annual plan.
Yeah. Peter.
Look, I support this discussion too, but I think we're absolutely clear on what we could be proposing, which is shifting risk from the council to the community. And we've got to be really upfront about that, or as Jeremy said, back to the government. So people need to know that, to be really clear of what we could be thinking about or may not. So we have to really got to consult with the community quite fully on this question. That's my view.
Cool.
And thank you, I totally agree. Peter, that we all have queries, Jeremy, and the likes, and it would be prudent, I would suggest, that we all meet in caucus at some stage after the information we receive, so that we can go through some of these queries between ourselves. Would anyone be willing to do that?
I'm willing to do that.
I think probably a better thing to do is actually to do that comprehensive review of the reserves policy, which we will do. I look at this page and we have talked about the need to have more flexibility in the reserves, but in the current economic climate, I'm questioning how fast we need to move that, and I'm sort of hearing some support around the table for that. Morris.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm just thinking about the reserves. The reserves function has a very important function of providing us with revenue from the investments that we have. And if we deplete the reserves too much, then that means that we don't have that income from that source, and then the only other source of income is from the rate. So it's kind of a, it's a two-edged sword, I think. So I'm certainly in favour of using the reserves to some extent, but we don't want to make, we don't want to reduce them too much at this stage. That sort of makes our discussions about the reserves in the future a little bit difficult, because we've already made this decision now, rather than thinking about all the implications of reducing the reserves, which we are planning to do in the future. So I think using the reserves to some extent, but I think we have to be pretty careful and don't draw them down too much at this stage.
Alistair, then Paul.
Thank you. I understand where you're coming from, Morris, but currently we're situated where the discussion is basically, we've got the options, we know what the increase is for the expenditure revenue, and the only thing we can pull that back with is reserves to help and assist with the rates increase. We can deal with it at the forefront, but we're not. We're only dealing with reserves. If we don't do reserves, then the rates increase. It's just going to be sky high. So it's a pretty simple calculation. It's either at the operation side, the reserve side, and the rates increase. That's where we are at the moment. But we're not looking at the operations. The money, it's increased from 45.8 million to 51 million. We're not looking at that. We're only looking at reserves. Is that right, Jeremy? So, and you're saying we don't look at the reserves because they're there for a reason, but there's nothing else we can look at. There's an unwillingness to look at the operational increase from 45.8 million to 51. We have to look at the reserves.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to that, I'm not saying we don't look at reserves. I'm saying we need to be careful how we look at reserves, because it's not simple, it's complex, and we've got to think about what's going to happen in the future as well. But I agree. I think looking at Dave's charts there on the expenditure on the flood mitigation work, we really have to look at that very closely to see whether or not that is really needed at this stage, and certainly the submissions are not very supportive of that. So I think that's something we have to take into account.
And just the same, sorry, just in continuation, just the same as you state, we need to be careful about using the reserves. We need to be careful about borrowing to put our ratepayers in debt.
Well, we're getting into a wee bit of a conversation here. Tanya, you'd like to respond? Then I've got Alistair.
If I could, Chair, I'd like to point out the benefit of the work that has been undertaken so far on this budget. If we look at this page again, year one, average rate increase was $61 or $1.20 a week, we told the community in the CD. The changes that we've put through so far, thus far, take that down to an average of $35 for the $450,000 property, or 70 cents a week. It has been quite significant progress in the reduction of impact on ratepayers and the information that we've produced to council with this deliberations.
Look, just on Paul's question about the 45 where it is now, we do have to start paying interest on the money that we borrowed. And even with a reduced spend on the infrastructure, we do need to have the knowledge to know what's the right thing to do. We've got at the stage 3 years projected, and I haven't got the information in front of me to know if that's the right decision. So we have to spend that money to be able to make the right decisions going forward. Alistair.
There's two parts to my question here. Now, we've got no confusion with GST in any of the figures you've given us.
The rates are the rates, as far as I know.
Are they GST inclusive? So we lose that, don't we?
Not our money.
Not our money.
Never has been, councillor.
No. So, okay, so that we're getting the rates are coming in GST inclusive. Everything else is going out GST exclusive.
Everything on that page there are the rates, it's exclusive.
And in any numbers we've been given so far, it's all GST exclusive. I
The
understand.
rates are also inclusive.
Yeah, the rates are, I understand that. Yeah. In my view, we've got three ways to go. We've got reserves, we've got rates, and reduce our levels of service. Or borrowed debt. And when I read my summary, Morris, and I did make it, in the submissions, there's not very many people wanting to go to debt. So really, when I come back to my interpretation of it all, it's either we use the reserves, the rates, or reduce our levels of service. Now, we've been looking quite strongly at using our rates and reducing that because of the affordability that we've been given within the submissions. We've also looked at our reserves. Now, we may have to use them, but we haven't looked really seriously at reducing our levels of service, as I understand it. It's a comment.
Well, we did have a bit of that conversation the other day of what you'd want to cut, and we didn't have, apart from perhaps during the environmental awards biannually, there wasn't a lot that came out of that. Do we want to reduce our people on the ground that are actually helping with education? I don't think so. It's, they do a really good job. But
that's fine, but I know on your farm, when you end up in a difficult financial position, you go through everything. And you go right down to the nearest cent and you take out those things that you can survive on. Now, are we at that stage? No, we're a business, well, I'm not sure whether we're a business or what we are, but we've got to look at it.
Robert.
Mr. Chairman, a lot of these discussions seem to be around perceptions as the result of submissions, but I noticed that in the graphing that we were showing you, the Western Southland one was there, massively outlying, and I think you made an indication that there was some kind of pamphlets circulated which had incorrect information on them, which looks to my eye as though that's influenced the response from the people in that area. Am I correct in thinking that? And if that is the case, then this delivery that we're getting from some councillors of how anguished the community is about the cost of rates might not be as valid as it first seems.
Yeah, so certainly there was some inaccuracies, but part of democracy is people, they actually activated the people to make a submission, and I still think that was a valuable part of it. All in Jeremy.
Thank you, Robert. The pamphlets were sent to more areas in Western. They received them and I take heart in the results of those analytics. Thank you. That in Fiordland, the no was substantial. In fact, there was no green fees. A lot of those analytics. So that flyer has gone to a lot of other areas as well as just Western.
Jeremy.
Just in regards to programs and things like that, we brought it up in the piece of paper we got of all the programs. And this probably comes way back to what Paul was indicating. It would be great to see what was this year and then you can compare where we're heading. he's right in having those numbers. But what there have been, I'm struggling to understand some of the numbers and the clarity around if we're looking at operational, what are we doing in the business? And here we've had some couple of major big total water allocation, water and land plan, looking at planning and legal costs. Legal is quite a large cost, has been. I can't see clarity in some of those projects starting to, they're sort of, it should be easy enough. And maybe even plan change to Otahi, it's going to be drawn out. Government indications of what we should be doing. I'm just trying to get my head around. I can't see legal costs going down, or I can't see those sort of things. You're feeling they should be. And I just I need that explanation. I need to see that. Can we see that clarity in those things? Or are you saying that we don't? Because I mean, for a challenging operational, we're saying these numbers actually, to be honest, for me, because they haven't got the first set of figures, they're this is where we're going to spend all the money. This is their program. But it should be relative to what was last year, or the annual reports and things. So you sort of see where I'm going here. From a point of, we've had some major big projects, and I would have thought they'd be easing up, but it doesn't seem to be easing up on cost around here. So I know there's a lot of money goes to legal, and I would have thought legal might be.
There will always be.
So I can speak to that briefly.
Yeah.
So this total budget is actually slightly less than last year's if you look at last year's operational expenditure, that's the point. And we've gone through and done an efficiency review on this, and we've taken a lot of money out. So there's no water allocation budget line in there, but you will note there are budget lines in the programs that we've been asked for. So there's a significant budget line in the wetlands work. And there's a decrease definitely in the budget lines around the planning work program for water. So that's gone into farm plans, and it's gone into the boots on the ground work there, and it's gone into wetlands. So you can see the total budgets here relative to last year's total expenditure as well. So the budget increases in this long-term plan are not driven by our operational expenditure. We are managing a performance transformation of the organisation to drive effectiveness through our work, which is what we started last year. So we entered into a zero budget, a zero expenditure increase for this budget, which is pretty much what we've achieved with, in fact, a very small lift, not even the CPI. So the two drivers for this rate increase in this budget are the original proposal for $2.3 million of operating expenditure to improve our response to infrastructure needs in the region, and the need to start to repay the financing on the debt that's been incurred in the shovel-ready projects to date. Those are the two drivers of cost increases. And there was a driver also on the original proposal around CPI, and that's been adjusted now that we've seen the CPI come down. So the operational expenditure is not what's driving this rate increase. The question for council is, what level of investment do you want to put into climate resilience above the existing budgets? And also the need to fund debt on an ongoing basis, and the debt financing as it is in the first year. Those are the two drivers for the change in these budgets. So we are in a situation where we do need to start to repay debt. I would consider that councillors need to think about the fact that debt is not a problematic strategy for councils. Councils have debt where there is long-term intergenerational assets to be managed, and that enables us to spread the cost of those assets across the people who get to benefit from them over time. So some of those asset spreads can be very long. You may not want to enter into long-term debt repayment where it is basically a point of diminishing return, you're continuing to pay when you don't need to. But those assets, such as the Stead Street pump station and Stop Bank infrastructure, are long-term infrastructure assets. So, those are the matters that are before us.
And that's not the first time you've explained that to us.
Right, we've got Peter, then Paul.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think some of the discussions we're having here are pretty big topics to be talking about here right now. It's about the future direction of the organisation or what we want to be in the future. I think when it comes to the reserves, I said before, I think that's a public discussion. It's essentially one of shifting risk away from this council to the households. How much is that risk? How much are the households prepared to put up to take? How much are we prepared to take? Mara said it quite well, and Paul was talking about that balance in the middle. But that's not a discussion we can have here right now. I think we need to go wider on that. I actually feel very strongly that we must move ahead with flood infrastructure. The time is right now. I don't know where we'll be in 3 years. Indeed, within local government or this council, we could be on another topic that's really important, that's taking all our attention. I don't want to, in 5 or 6 years' time, go back to the community and say, oh, we sort of just got lost on that flood infrastructure stuff. We knew we had to do it because we had all this information coming in to do this work, but we never got around to it. The public didn't think it was warranted. And we're over in that building over there, the emergency management, trying to explain away a position that we never took some time ago. So we've got to keep all that sort of stuff in mind. So I'm up for those discussions, like Alistair's pointed out, but whether we need to have those really big ones on future direction, right at this moment, I'm not sure about that.
Paul.
Back to Jeremy's point regarding the previous year, which I've raised a few minutes. Looking at the first year of the adjusted financial forecast version 2, the operating revenues gone up from previous year by 4.6 million. And of that, rates revenue is increasing by 3.435. And then the expenditure has gone up, will be going up under that version 2 by 5.3. So all of a sudden there's an 800 or $700,000 short. Employee benefit expenses going up by 2.7. So the 3.4 increase in rates is counteracted by a large proportion of that, and other expenses are going up by 1.6. The other, I understand that the 2.3 is partially spent through wages and other expenses. That's where it looks like we're going to be sitting behind the 8 ball on the adjusted financial figures.
So can I clarify matter? Tanya, I think also there's the impact of removing your funds from the reserves also has an impact on your income. So it's an income impact for around about 730,000. So you are taking with one hand and giving with the other. So there's a 3% rates increase in removing funding from the reserves.
Over what, how many, not on an annual basis? It'll be over the 700,000.
That's over 2 years, isn't it?
It's 3.5% in all the money. So we've taken out $4 million. 140,000.
Yeah, 140,000. Not 700.
Chair, looking for some direction on the proposed financial adjustments and the proposed reserves that we've brought back to the council.
I've got Morris waiting patiently, then we'll move to that. I think we'll have further good discussions.
Well, thank you, Nick. What I was trying to say before, I'm not sure when I say stuff, people don't seem to understand me. I'm not sure why that is.
Oh, welcome to my world, councillor.
We're in the club.
Yeah.
It's making my wife voice. Well, I wanted to move on actually. Before Tanya, you said on this table here, You know, this is the actual impact. We're talking about all this other stuff, but what's really important is the impact on the ratepayer of what we propose to do. So, you know, on this table here, under the updated budget's use of reserves proposal from day one, we've got an average increase of $35 per year for a $450,000 property, and the other ones are there as well. And in future years, it's 47, 48, the other table is slightly less. These are not massive numbers for people to be able to cut. I really think that, you know, it's time we stop trying to analyse the expenditure of the council to the minutest detail and look at what the impact will be on the ratepayers from the proposals that we have. I don't know if how many people looked at the table, at the report that was sent to us on Friday, which has about 71 ratepayers and the effect on those. Because it was raining most of yesterday, I spent a lot of time looking at it. I've produced a few charts, but I want to show you those later because it doesn't relate directly to this, the expenditure on the consequences of this on each individual ratepayer, which I think we need to look at that closely and really decide whether or not it is such a huge imposition. I don't think that what we've got proposed at the moment is.
Thanks, Maura. I see those examples have certainly come down sharply with some of the numbers we were seeing earlier. So look, I think it is time to move on a little bit. And you know, we're trying to find, with the reserves, we're trying to find that fine balance about helping people out in quite a difficult economic time. But when I look at the, you know, at the 10-year figure, even if we did take out something out of that general reserve for next year, it is still increasing at a level that gives me a degree of comfort. So I'm still quite keen to perhaps see that general reserve either taken out or reduced for the second year. Get a bit of an indication on that because we're going to move on. Are you happy with what is on that second graph, or is there a degree of comfort to actually lower that slightly?
This one?
If you look at, you've got two reserves pages. The page. So the updated reserve, the bottom one. We did have a discussion on Friday about the possibility of not doing $500,000 in year 1 and 2. We're not doing it in year 1. So the question is, do you want to do it in year 2? Or, John?
Yeah, I think the originally gave us just not seeing a lift in reserves over the 2 or 3 year period, which I think staff have done. I'm comfortable with what the average sits within reserve because to me it's all one pie. It just depends on how we split it. We're dealing with this in the annual plan later on. So for me, I'm comfortable because staff have taken direction to the bottom line that we asked for.
Have a run round.
Yes, I will. We'll start with Eric.
Well, I wasn't planning on me. Look, we're in a situation where we've got to find a bit of compromise. And having listened to everybody, I'm sort of happy that with what you suggested into the using some reserves in the out years. But we need to be quite cautious about that, but I'm happy enough that we're entertaining it.
Thanks, Eric. Lyndall.
Yeah, likewise, I've sat and done lots of listening, some huffing and puffing. Sorry, that's how I process. Yeah, I am really concerned about the longer term impact of reducing the reserves. Because to me, they're the kind of risk backstop. And I'm, mentioned insurance last time we were talking, like I wasn't even allowed to ask my question. Anyway, they're our insurance really, as far as being able to manage at short notice. So, and then there's the impact on income later, which concerns me. But and there is a certain reduction in cost to the ratepayer, but actually in some cases it's very small. We've fiddled around with not very big numbers in some cases. And looking at some of the wider impact data on properties, actually it would be my constituents that are still gonna pay the most. Their reductions with the new figures are not as big as some other areas, so I'm a wee bit concerned about that too. But as far as the proposal on the paper in front of me, sitting around 13% would be fantastic if we can do that. Thanks. Never mind the impact on what we actually get done. Sorry, I'm not finished. I'm really also, you mentioned Iris next gen work reductions. You mentioned vehicle purchases. I don't care about this. The science work and its timing. You know, people are demanding science from us all the time, even though they don't believe it. And the climate resilience work, kind of reductions in budgets. I'm a little bit concerned about how that timing might leave us with the work that we're actually supposed to be doing. But I see you having something to say, so.
Tanya.
Guys, I'd like to just clarify my statement, councillor. It's the capital expenditure, not the operating expenditure. So the capital expenditure is part of the ongoing work program. We don't see it as changing in the service.
Hope not.
Thank you.
As we carry on around, if we're deciding reserves, the thing we're not probably going to get really clear is, you're happy with that, or have you got comfort for a slight further reduction? So, Morris.
So just to get my mind clear on this, so the bottom table here, the post deliberations balances with those reductions, like the biosecurity land stus is going down to about half what it is now. What's the consequence of that? Does that mean we have to alter what we're doing? I mean, land sustainability is really important.
Yeah.
These are not the services, just services.
The surpluses, with the land sustainability, we've also allocated a provisional amount to an agency that requested funding, a new one. And then in the land sustainability budget, we've allocated 235,000 provisional to an agency that asked for funding, and in addition, we're putting some of the, as it says in the document, into operating. The consequences are that those balances are not available for the council to use in other activities, should you choose to want to fund further applications for projects in the community. Now, we've particularly left a balance within the land's biosecurity for biosecurity incursion. I'm hoping that that's sufficient. We have no idea. It's an insurance against other outbreaks of something.
So it doesn't really affect the operation unless there's a disaster, but it does affect other activities, such as our diversified fund that earns money for us through that.
Yes.
You talked about that before.
The council was asked the other day about the marine reserve and whether it was, what is our forecast for year 2 and was it sufficient? We hope that our estimate is correct. We simply don't know. So what a reserve does is it allows you to back yourself if you're wrong in a decision. But it's the extent at which you need to be able to do that the council is wished to debate.
Well, I'm certainly with Lyndall. I really am concerned if we're going to reduce our reserves too much. But if you're comfortable with that second table there with those amounts of reserves, then I'm happy to go with that.
John.
Yeah, look, I think I've said enough. I'm very comfortable. Thanks to the staff doing the work. And look, I do look at that target reserve lift and how it's been building as maybe an overrating on ES's behalf for not being used. So I think this is partly giving back to the community at a time needed. So I'm very comfortable, and I do once again thank staff for taking direction.
Neville.
We're at the stage where we need to consider using some of those reserves, Chairman. Squirreling the money away for quite a while now, but I agree with the post-deliberation balances. I think that the staff have done a really good job of refining down our discussions.
Thanks, Neville. Peter.
Yeah, in the here we gave direction and come back, so I'm comfortable with that to this point, the use of reserves, but I think the further we go, this council's always been reasonably conservative in the way we've gone about our business. That could be changing in the future. I'm unsure about that because hearing the discussions around the table here. But going beyond this, I think we need to have community discussions around actually what the reserves are for, that we actually do have them, what they are for, and what that means if we're going to change our view around the usage of those reserves. I understand there will be things that we will have to consult on regardless of whether we do or not, but I think this is a really important point, and Alistair brought up about the levels of service. That's a community conversation too, in my view. So yeah, thank you, and quite comfortable to this point.
Paul.
Thank you. So I'm happy that there's been a concerted effort to look at some aspects to lower the hit onto ratepayers. I believe that we are still in the submissions process and listening to submitters. Maybe we can look at a lot of other things, but it's a hard step for a lot of people to get their heads around, organisation efficiency, levels of service reduction, use of reserves, improvements in procurement and works and assets. There's a whole raft of things that we could do better. We need a wee bit of left field thinking sometimes to get ahead of the curve, because the curve is going that way. So having to a point that we've used some of those points to reduce this, but overall, I think we could really knuckle down and improve a lot better. Thank you.
Alistair.
Yeah, I'm concerned with this use of reserves. We've been presented with stuff going forward, but to get the idea on how they betwixt and between going backward to see what has happened in the past would give us some good idea of how it might happen going forward. Now, the environment might be changed. I'm sure it will be, but really at the moment we're sitting there, I'm sitting there looking at these reserves going up by, I think it was 10 million at the last estimate over a 10-year period. What have we done in the past? What are we putting onto our ratepayers? I'm happy for these reserves to be used a little greater, and I would love to see that our rate increase goes down beneath 10%, so that it in itself, we're really saying that the community is going to be able to say to us, these fellas have listened. And if we put out the capital value rating, then, they have listened and they understand what our plight is. So, and really, when you look at your submissions, we've got to minimise borrowing. That's what they've told us. And if you look at the other councils sitting around with high borrowings, they're caught with interest. Okay, thank you.
Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I did listen to Morris and I did understand what he said, and I feel as though I should be sitting on this side of the table. Because I'm fully in support of what you've done. I'm really impressed with it, actually. I think those figures you came up with. And I think that the philosophy is also set well as well. I think it's a well-balanced position that we're taking. So thank you.
Jeremy.
Just to clarify, we're just talking about reserves, are we?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
That's fine. No, I'm just I think some of the usage of reserves is hugely important, and you could do more. And I've tried to explain about the abilities we've got other funding mechanisms than that we have now than we did 3 years or 4 years ago. So still understanding reserves is important. We're going to have a good look at those to get our minimum balances in due course. I appreciate what you've done. It's probably, it may be a good balance what what you've got there, but it's actually understanding where those reserves are going to get spent too. It's around the flood protection or if we're using leased land. I think Tani and I had talked, well, there's a limit to how much money you can actually put into this budget. So, no, look, at the end of the day, they've been used, but they're there to be used too. That's where you seem to, there's a bit of a feel that, oh, it's our money, can't let it go. And you're indicating, there's indications of, oh, what happened if we've got projects then and there and that? Well, really, these projects always come along. You've got to say, why haven't we using it in the past? And the money's been sitting there. So I don't disagree with it, but we've got different ways of funding things, and some of the stuff needs to be used. And you are using it, but I think it could be doing more.
Start.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was about as clear as mud from what I'm hearing.
Just make a decision.
We're all speaking in a weird language.
Probably the majority are saying the staff have done a great job and they're quite happy with that. But there's probably a reasonable number of saying maybe we could go a little bit harder. But I think at the end of that day, I'm looking at year two, you'll have another crack at it next year anyway. So am I right in thinking?
Chairman, can I just add, that the discomfort might be covered when we, as is the recommendation, look at the reserves in a separate session in the new financial year, right? So I think that's where the further tweaking and fiddling, might, it's the wrong word, might happen for those councillors who've still got questions. I think, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm getting the feeling that there is a majority for the hard work you've done for that modern reserves policy at the moment. Am I right? Okay, we can move on. So,
Would you like to have a cup of coffee?
yeah.
We've got time to
Coffee break?
we've got time to have a coffee break.
If you want to go over to
I'll stay. You will be careful.
I think the general feeling is we're happy with the engineers.
Good. Okay, welcome back to the deliberations. I think we now move to discussion on infrastructure, strategy and debt level. Who's leading us into this? It looks like the team at the end of the table, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. As outlined in the supplementary item, a significant driver of the rates increase is the draft infrastructure strategies for all year. And the first report, operations report, contained a wee bit of detail about the planned capital works investment and debt. We did indicate that we'd like to spend a bit more time on the infrastructure strategy during this deliberations meeting, so a chance for councillors to ask questions. We are happy to talk through, I guess, the change in operational expenditure that has been put forward as a result of submissions a little bit further. And there is the Camilla that has come that doesn't form part of the current infrastructure strategy, but have an outline, I guess, how that relates to the infrastructure strategy and the process that we followed here. So the chance for question and answer under the maximum final decisions. Obviously, what Tanya just presented showed quite a decrease in the debt that was sitting within the long-term plan consultation document from 73 million to 50 million, was it, Tanya? Do we want to talk about operational expenditure maybe first?
Yeah, perhaps if we Chair and talk about the operational reductions and planning can talk about it a little bit in more detail. And essentially, we still part of the infrastructure strategy is to bring forward the core roles that will help us on our journey to do the work in terms of the technical expertise that we need to invest in the activity. And obviously, the infrastructure strategy also talks about the need to do increased maintenance to our infrastructure, so that's still, even with the reduction, we're still confident that will be able to take place. It allows us to build up our knowledge and expertise as well as we increase our work. So year one, whilst there is a reduction, it still helps us deliver the work because it allows us to learn and improve our processes and systems in line for year two. We also will talk a little bit around the flexibility that council will have through the infrastructure around the capital projects as well. And there will be opportunities to come back to council when our knowledge and understanding of those capital works increases, so we can bring that back to council as and when that happens, perhaps later in the LTP years 2 and 3. So if I just hand over to Tanya, she's probably talking a little bit more detail around the proposed reductions in the operational budget.
Thank you, Paul. Just looking at a budget that we started with back in November, we had two numbers that were driving the rate increase: the current climate resilience project and the proposed climate resilience project. The number for the current climate resilience project started at 1.4 million, and the proposed climate resilience projects was 2.3. The amount that ratepayers will be funding for the current projects is 1.29 or 1.3. Yes, 450,000. So there's a 450,000 transfer into there. And the budget for proposed finance climate resilience is 1.67 minus 500,000 use reserves. So the numbers have come down dramatically in terms of we've reduced the expenditure and we've added in reserves to fund.
If we could, you've said a lot of numbers there. Tony, I'm just saying, do we have?
No, sorry.
Trying to quickly scribble these down if I can.
Yeah. So the net amount that ratepayers are going to fund for proposed climate resilience projects is now 1.17 million.
1.17.
Yeah, that's after allocating reserves to that, and after reduction in expenditure, deferral of some of the expenditure from year 1 to year 2.
So is it year 1? Or
It's year 1.
Year 1.
Well, I'm surprised that hasn't come down a little bit further, actually. Conversations around the table. So that's before reserves, that's only about 600,000 from the 2.3. Some discussions we're having over the time lag in getting consents. And actually, probably councillor concern about proceeding with works that don't have government funding. And the 3 that are on the LTP, I understand, don't.
Richie, this is simply for the flood bank asset maintenance work we're discussing. So we have to be clear, there's 3 things happening. There's the flood bank maintenance, there's the Kanoa work, and then there's the asset improvement work. And the 2.3 was always for improving operating maintenance expenditure. So we have to, and Randall will help with that. I've got a statement here that might help if I can read it out to you, that about how all 3 might be conflated perhaps in your mind. I've written this advice to the exec. I said, I note here that councillors are asking questions about the proposed Ariti Waihopo projects and the overlap with the Kanoa projects, or potential overlap. My advice is this: the LTP budget does not automatically approve the spending of funds on the projects. It allows for the infrastructure strategy to be funded after consultation with the public. The public were not against improving flood resilience, and many were commented favourably on the need to do so. Council has within the LTP budget / infrastructure strategy an allowance of $14 million for capital expenditure in the first 3 years, and significantly more after that. The CapEx is proposed to be funded by debt in the first 3 years in the LTP. Subsequent to the adoption of the LTP, Council can choose to approve or move various projects within the infrastructure strategy as long as there is no significant departure. Even then, the Council can use Section 80 of the Local Government Act to choose to depart from policies and strategies. In the next few months, the funding of the Kanoa work will become clearer. The design and costs of the proposed LTP projects will also become clearer. Council does not need to make decisions prior to adopting the LTP on either or projects, but needs to be assured that a works program that encompasses all levels of service improvement, asset improvement and deferred maintenance will be provided to them prior to actually committing the funds. Further, that the funds in the LTP are sufficient to allow both to happen. The projects proposed in the LTP may need to be rescheduled to accommodate the Kanoa projects. There is no need to consult specifically on the Kanoa projects. The consultation on the infrastructure strategy and associated budget was very clear. Work needs to happen, assumptions on government funding and debt were clearly laid out. The debt for Kanoa projects is potentially 2.4 million, well within the $14 million in the LTP 3-year debt forecast. A rejigging of timelines might be required. What I'm trying to say there is that clearly that there was an assumption that the projects would start in year 2, capital projects 2 and 3, and that they would be debt funded. They were not put into the Kanoa bid because the Kanoa bid requires them to be shovel ready with the consent. They could not be, so we have a chicken and egg situation. What was in the Kanoa bid, and Randall will explain, was a different set of projects. There is sufficient within the 3 years in the LTP for councillors to commit, but as I've said before, actually funding the project is a decision you make as a council at another meeting. This is a budget meeting to provide potential envelope of funding over a period of time and to agree the infrastructure strategy.
John.
Thanks. Yeah, there's been quite a bit of confusion on the street by the councillors, but myself around this. And just going forward, is there another way of reporting it? So when we're looking at a folder where that falls into government funding, shovel ready, maintenance, all the stuff that we're picking up ourselves for capital, just so we've got absolute clarity what we're looking at, because yeah, but so at the back of this has been quite the show.
The strategy encompasses all 3. Yes, we're certainly trying to improve. We currently report government funding at the bottom line, and we will continue to do so as separate.
Well,
So just to be clear, the $2.3 million has been reduced down to this 1.17, 1.2 if you want to round it up. And that is the operating expenditure. So in that operating expenditure are 2 line items: the cost of people and their support in the organisation, and the cost of doing maintenance on the stock banks, which can't be capitalised because that's an operating expense. And if you're looking at your budget lines, councillors, you can see the reduction from the financial forecast 2024-25 of 26,448, and it's gone down to 25,379. So that's your forecasts and your supplementary page done. Sorry, they don't have, my one doesn't have page numbers on it. Which is that, was what you've been looking at. So I've got the lower line, but it's your 3 columns. So you can see the reduction from 26,448 to 25,279. And councillor, sorry, during this, I have got up the financial statements for this current financial year. So if you look at this current financial year, the other expenses line for this year was 23,644. So you're seeing the difference there between that 1.2 and current expenses plus a small amount of interest. So that makes sense for you, I hope, of your operating expenditure. So it is, we're still proposing 1.2-ish, 1.17 million for the operating expenditure.
1.6, well, 1.67 less the reserves.
Yes, the reserves money, yes, yes. So funded, yes, but for, in terms of the increase in rates, it's a 1.2.
Jeremy.
Yeah, I was just looking at the, looking at the CapEx on the infrastructure strategy. You got 1.8 for the first year, 8.4, 4.1. So that 1.8, so 1.8 isn't actually equivalent, it's just the modelling and bits and pieces of prep. And I'll probably go back to John, and there's obviously a bit of confusion about shovel reading and what was going to be our share. But once these get put in here, they're like the 1.8 is getting rated this year, or the 8.4. When you look at them, they're there, but you're saying, oh well, they could change. But are they? You're saying we can't change. As long as we're within our reallocate, is it?
We can certainly.
Under a certain section, we can actually. Can we take them out in the future?
Well, if there's no significant departure, then you can free to change them, and even then. So significant departure would be 5 or 10% of our total change, which is quite large. Can I help the councillor with that 1.8?
Yeah.
And I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but I know 1.2 is the data and modelling, science and modelling. 350 was capital expenditure sundry, so that was culverts, gates and other assets. We've changed that now to 250, and I can't remember the balance between 1.55 and 1.8 in that first year. Interesting is in the financial budgets, the assumption is that the depreciation and the finance cost are incurred the year after, and that during the year the asset will be accrued and built or used in the following years when we start to depreciate. So year one costs come in year two. Year two costs, as you see them, come in year three. So year one costs, there are no real impact in the year one rates from this infrastructure strategy. There's a small amount from the work we've done this year, 50,000 of depreciation will be coming into year one. But other than that, the costs follow a year later.
And it is entirely sensible to come back to the council when we know more. I understand that the capital events and the flexibility that we need to retain as council in order to do that. So we're highly aware of that and we'll continue to have that conversation.
So just in regards to that CapEx then, so if, for instance, the government all of a sudden found billions of dollars, which they're not going to. No. And this become a 40% our share, and the adjustments, we're obviously tweaking the dollars, leveraging our dollars. I suppose I just have a question go, how would that look like rates in the future, just in year 2, year 3? I know it would be something easily probably just take our share out or take that out of it. That CapEx, the cost, the interest, and the depreciation. I know it's basically a loan facilities. I suppose that's and more to the point though. I suppose we've got all these debt. We've got this long-term long-term debt, which is always it has been a concern even for us when we're doing our long-term plan, putting in stuff and nothing's guaranteed. I suppose it sort of how should I say, muddles the debt loading. Oh, it doesn't muddle it, just says, well, this is a scenario. But there could be other scenarios too that may not happen. So I'm just trying to, I know we've got to have it in there to get the money, but then it'd be nice to probably see it without it there to say, well, this is what status quo would look like. On the context of all this though, also is that I'm not saying taking CapEx out. It's hugely priority 4 or 5s. Business as usual, we've got to make sure that we're firming up or making the banks we have as they are designed as a priority too. So there's another discussion we need to really talk about.
You want to respond to that, Tanya?
Sorry,
It's just top of my head response to the councillor. If funding was available in years 2 and 3, with what we have in debt funding. And I suggest it won't be because I think they've put in place a 3-year program now, but that would have saved us 1% of rates. In terms of the assumptions we've made, we've purposely put the assumption on government funding at the year 4 mark, knowing that the government was coming out with another 3-year plan. They're not expecting or not necessarily wanting to make assumptions about the first 3 years, because knowing that we weren't in a permitted, we had to have design drawings and consents to qualify for the first 3 years. And we're not at that stage. That is what the first year is for. So the next tranche, and we don't know, but the next tranche of government funding for 3 years, we hope to be in it. Well, we don't hope, we need to be in that place where we can then, our next lot of projects will be funding in whatever is available at the time.
Lyndall.
Thanks, Chairman. What's at the front of mind for me is actually there were a number of submitters who were comfortable with getting the flood protection network at level 3 consistently. So there's that, and the fact that actually I think it was Randall mentioned being flexible, giving us the flexibility to do the things when we need to do them or when there's assistance in terms of funding. So also that's in the front of my mind. And the other thing is that just to remind councillors that we've never been in debt before. This is actually quite a major for the council, generally speaking. So trying not to get hung up on having some debt, because actually it's the first time that we've borrowed for a really long time. I hate personally being in debt, but when you've got to do it, you've got to do it, right? So the 3 projects that are Reti, Wyndham, Waihakai, etc. Yeah. In terms of those things, I think we have to keep that in the front of our minds, because that work's got to be done. So I'm trying really hard not to get kind of emotional, but also, sucked into, minutiae of some of the figures. Every dollar counts completely. In my house, it certainly does. But the level 3 approval from a number of submitters, and the fact that those projects need to be done, and we need to be flexible enough with what we've got in the bank to take advantage of other opportunities. That's what I think this discussion should actually be about. And if you can, guarantee me that the way you've worked it out is going to work, then great.
Paul, you like to?
So we're still, in terms of the capital work that Tanya's alluded to, we'll still bring out the detail as and when they become more finalised and more certain, for sure. Of course. And as Tanya's alluded to, that's likely to happen in years 2 and 3. So won't happen in year 1. And in terms of you're quite correct, the operational focus is to use the proposed increase money to deal with the 4s and the 5s, or to increase our maintenance. And what we're suggesting is, whilst this is an increase of work, we're using year 1 to sort of test the systems and processes. We don't want to be in a situation where we're underspending money that we've asked for. So we want to be really clear that we can deliver that work and then take those learnings into years 2 and 3. So.
Clarifying. So, Paul, just to be really clear, if councillors are agreeing to budgeting $1.8 million in capital expenditure, it is not a decision to spend it, nor are they making a decision to spend it on those specific 3 projects until formal business cases come back to council. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the clarification. I think what you're telling me, and I wasn't sure, is that figure that will include the modelling for actually maintaining, upgrade our existing network. So that's good. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Look, around this table, I think people know I'm pretty strong on this stuff. I think this is one of our prime functions of this council around community safety. Now, we have a lot of it goes round and round the table. We're talking about where we can save and what we can do. We've got to be really clear that we're not going to waver to a point to show central government that we're not committed on community safety when it comes to flood infrastructure. So well, I do take it that there is reductions here proposed, and I do support that. We've got to see this. We've got to see this through with a bit of conviction. So just a wee thing there to carry on, please, Mr. Chairman.
I've got Paul and John.
Just to you, Paul, just, you know, you're concerned about underspending on it's not about the underspending, it's what you get for your spend. If you can achieve half again, it's always good. You know, you may not want gold standard, we just want standard. And to get standard, you might actually achieve a lot more than saving our money.
Well, we'll continue to, in the process of the infrastructure, recognise the learning that we'll need and the experience that will come through as we release work. Contractors as we do the work, and we have to bring all of that back to council as we progress. We're just key that we can do, certainty that we can deliver on that maintenance work, those streets.
John.
You're just picking up Pete's point about making sure we carry out our responsibilities, and I do have confidence in the catchment team, and Tara's a great example of working well with smaller contractors, coming under budget on time. I don't think there's been that many examples where we haven't been well serviced by the catchment team in the last 2 years that I can remember. So, you know, I see this as a really good investment, and you know, it is bang for buck, the spending. So, I'm very strong in supporting this.
Jeremy?
Just on, I was just going to point out Lyndall's comment in regards, we are in debt now, aren't we? We've got debt. So we've been living with
First
it
time in a long time though, councillor.
a few years. I mean, that was the discussion last winter. So, but I mean, we've got a lot more looking ahead. Could that money be allocated if it was sort of in the budgets looking ahead? Could it actually go into the maintenance in regards, if it's sort of designed, but if we said, oh, look, some of this capital stuff, you know, designing new, but we want to really hammer the 4 and 5s. I know we've got a bit of a budget in regards to, you know, I think Randall's come back at 36 million to fix all those up. You know, just because there was certainly a bit of a from the public saying, hey, yeah, we're really into those, but building new was not quite what they wanted. So I'm just trying to tease that out.
I'll let the CFO, but I think the initial part is CapEx, and it will be if at all? And I'll hand over to Randall, who should be able to answer that.
Yeah, thank you, councillor, for the question. So once the model's built, it's a capitalised asset. The data that feeds into the model will be reviewed as we get new data. So every flood event creates new data. We need to have a pattern of surveys that lets us capture those changes in the river, so that we can. And I'm sure you'll remember one of the submitters suggested that our flow data hasn't changed much since the 80s and 90s when he was involved. And I'm also sure that you'll remember that we haven't actually had any floods post that data being made. So that's what we have to do, is being able to capture the changes in those river systems more regularly.
Eric, Lyndall, and Peter. Eric.
No wonder I'm reading numbers, but anyway. I'm just thinking about our sort of flood protection, and what I'm sort of trying to get my head around is we seem to have silos of maintenance and capex, and what's the demarcation like between those silos? And is it a good idea to have clearly structured silos, and we've just got to do a job and we might need to move stuff around? Can you just get my head around that for me?
Councillor, so I guess the weakness of relying on central government money is it's sporadic at best. So we do need to be self-reliant as possible to maintain our assets. And I think this budget that we proposed would allow us to do that. It wouldn't allow us to do significant upgrades when you think about the distance of the stopping to the 516 kilometres. And I know it's frustrating to work with averages, but $1 million a kilometre has been what our experience is in recent years in terms of a new stopping. So it is a big cost if we are to upgrade those banks fully across our network. We have to go through a process, a better process, to present you guys business cases on what the next round of capital upgrades look like.
Okay. But we also take, maybe just take the opportunity operationally, where we've got maintenance and we've got edge protection, that we'll do that at the same, attempt to try and do that all at the same time. It's not we don't operationally silo the work, we'll try to bring it all together at the same time. Was that a question, Councillor Roy?
Thank you.
Lyndall.
Thanks, Chairman. So in my mind, the flood resilience project are not disconnected to the wetlands and the broader kind of slow the flow conversation, right? Because we can't keep building up flood banks forever. That's not the answer. And that's something that I think perhaps the community missed in the information that we put out to them for consultation. That actually some of the flood protection work is, wetlands or whatever alternatives there are. But I don't understand how that work dovetails into this budget conversation for generally, I suppose. So if you can help me out now, that's great. If it's another conversation that we need to have, that's also fine.
If I can answer the question financially, Randall can answer the operational. Within the budget to increase maintenance, we've added staff. We've already added staff in the last year, very important to this, and Dr. Ella Lawton. So we are looking to build that knowledge through an integrated approach within Randall's team. So there are people funded through not lots of people, but there are bodies funded now to help with that integration.
And so, Council, we were that we've got the slow the flow projects, and what we alluded to in the infrastructure strategy. That knowledge and opportunities will develop as we progress through the LTP. And we made efforts to sort of recognising that you can only build a stock bank so high, but what this infrastructure strategy is making sure that we're looking after what we've got and managing it properly. And as we progress, it will, I presume, become clear with our modelling and the work that we've done through the solar flow, that any future investments that this council might want to make in flood protection might be best placed in the mid to upper catchments using more natural approaches rather than the hard infrastructure. So I think that will be an ongoing conversation for council throughout the next 3 years, and perhaps by the next LTP we'll have more definite approaches around alternative infrastructure, as you alluded to. And I think just maybe that was my phone ringing. I do apologise.
That's a whiskey, Mr. House.
Thank you, councillor. The slow the flow projects will complement the flood bank network. They won't replace the flood bank network. There are small sections of our flood bank network we will continually review the raising them, particularly large urban areas.
Peter, you finished, Lou?
Yes, thank you.
Peter.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just interested, Randall, we talked about data collection. So this model is adaptive, not only to events that may have happened or continue to happen, but to incoming information. So unlocking arrears. And I'd like to say that's updated report from NEMA from 2018 is on its way very soon. Is that updated work, would that feed into that model too?
Yeah, thank you, councillor. You're correct. The 2018 NEMA reports, the national release is due next month. We are hoping to have the regional data available next month. The models can incorporate the changes in that data. The 2018 report suggested we need to keep planning for 10% more rainfall, 15% more flow. So that would be on top of the historic data that we would use.
Jeremy.
Just one quick one was, I really support what around the river management floods. It's going back, sort of investing back in the real core business, what we were here for way back. But I'll just make a suggestion, and this is probably to Wilma, is that your CDO, sorry, just in regards to there could be a reallocation of resources within the building, you know, supporting numbers, people in river management. There may be other areas, unfortunately, that may be a bit less. I mean, that I'm just putting it out there, that's how businesses they work. There's some different focus, and I mean, we can't say what we want, but it's actually just how getting a different outcome, and I'd suggest that that could be looked at. So
we've probably given the infrastructure a reasonable hammering, but I think, you know, and we heard that from the public, is that we need the information to make the right choices, whether it's slow the flow or whether diversions can be made to actually protect human life. And I guess I'm feeling more comfortable with that figure now, that it will be used in all those facets. So that's discussion on infrastructure and on debt level. I think we're sort of hearing that we don't want to incur debt any more than we have to. Correct. So we're ready to confirm the infrastructure strategy.
Yeah. Sir, why do we confirm it when it's going to come back to, before it actually happens, it's going to come back to us?
Well, it's part of the budget, part of this budget.
It's the principle.
Yeah.
Then we will approve the whole.
Then we approve it when you get back from where?
Somewhere. No, I think I'll be away.
How will we go?
strategy. Sorry, I can't remember it all. About the viewing alternative methods. It's in there. It's in there. I just want to confirm that we have options. It's just not a moral grief. So I think that there's other ways of dealing with water, so to speak.
It's definitely a component of the infrastructure strategy.
Rachel.
Through you, Chair, just wanted to note when I alluded to it at the start of the meeting, what staff are now proposing, given that by the deliberations last week and this morning, there are some fairly substantial changes to budgets, etc., that have been made. To bring through to an extraordinary meeting of council to be held next Wednesday during committee day, the final set of documents, just so that you can have a level of comfort that we have picked up your directions correctly before it goes up for adoption on the 10th of July. So we're proposing that the various documents, budgets, infrastructure strategy, etc., will come back to you in just over a week's time, if that is acceptable to council.
No, thanks for that, Rachel. So yes, you will see some more figures before we finally confirm that. John.
Is that to confirm the floor?
If you weren't clear on that, the auditor needs council's approval of the changes. First, to seek consultation prior to audit on the basis that that is the general agreement of council.
Just raise an issue. Tanya, in this budget, we've not removed depreciation expenses, is that correct? So councillors did discuss that last week. So in relation to the conversation around debt, do you want to address that before we leave this page and move on?
In terms of the funding and depreciation. So depreciation, we were asked to look at asset reserves again, which we did. Depreciation as an expense has to occur regardless of outline. That's a genuine accounting standard and prudence. So asset reserves will continue to grow because we add depreciation to them. How much the ratepayers to fund is dependent then on another decision. So we have always funded through reserves, so we have depreciation going in to a reserve, and then we have money there to buy another vehicle or another piece of science equipment. With new plant, particularly long-lived assets, we're now taking on debt. I think I mentioned last week that some councils, particularly the TAs, have made a decision not to fully fund their depreciation, which means they don't have as much money in the bank put away as they have for the balance and their depreciation. The idea being that a very long-lived asset, they're going to pay off the debt first and then start depreciating, rather than have $50 million in reserves. This is a potential change for council that we recommend you discuss as part of the overall reserves policy when we come back in the new year, new financial year, as to whether you want to fund in the future both depreciation and interest on the pump station building, for example. The shorter lived assets within the pump station, the electrics or electronics they'll be, and other things will need to be depreciated and paid, replaced in whatever 10, 20 years. But the building and the pumps themselves are 50 to 80 year assets. And this LTP is mentioned in the document Rachel put out here. There's a 1% rate difference in year 2. Year one. But it's a change in policy direction from what we've been doing in the past. What we're pointing out is that it's for council, recommend that council consider that as part of your review of funding assets and use reserves.
So I guess the question is, why don't we start doing that now? I mean, you've got Stead Street, if it's got 50 to 80 years, any new structure, your depreciation is very low in actual terms in the first 5 to 7 years. We upgrade a flood bank, we know that they're not going to deteriorate. And so the question is, why don't we look at perhaps the first 5 years of not depreciating some of those larger assets, which actually have quite a different, they impact on your balance sheet, don't they?
Can I respond to you? We are not paying debt in the first 2 years and have moved the debt repayment into year 3. So it's not, we're not double dipping, if you like, in years 1 and 2. If we've been paying debt and depreciating, I believe I would have brought this to your attention earlier, but given that we've delayed the debt payment until year 3, this is, in my mind, my advice, it's not an urgent item, but it's an item to be discussed for the next annual plan as we move forward, because in the outer years, it does get to become bigger numbers. So we did want to highlight it to you, and it's still your choice. But we can't choose, once we've made a policy decision, we can't choose which assets and we can't choose which years. We have to be very clear that it would be for a purpose, so it would be a long-lived asset over the life of the asset. Well, and we would have to write that into our policies.
Jeremy?
Can you just clarify when we're saying not paying the debt, the 450K, is that on the finance, or is that on the, because you got interest and principal?
It's offsetting interest.
Offsetting the interest.
Yes.
So effectively, whether you're looking at it as a cost to those projects, we are funding some of it through our lease reserves, the finance of it.
So we're budgeting for the interest cost on the current debt.
So we are paying for the
Yes,
interest.
we're paying interest, sorry.
Yeah,
And it was a
principal being
decision
paid
of,
back.
from a workshop way back that we agreed that we wouldn't pay the principal of the debt until year 3. At that time, recognising the number of things that were coming together in the budget.
Peter, were you indicating?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking for a steer on confirmation of infrastructure strategy. I'm pretty to give you a yes on that. Also, I'd just like to say to the council, this is the difficult stuff that right at the start of this day, Dave showed us the big red press of no, we don't want you to do this, we don't want you to do this. This is the hard stuff in the council. We know we've got to lead with a community that are unsure about the work, at best unsure about the work. But when we're presented with the information, we have to go forward with it. So this becomes the hard bit where we don't just do what's asked of us out in our communities, that we forward plan those eventualities. So just noting that. So giving you a steer, Mr. Chairman, on that.
Just following up from Peter, and the secondary thing is the comms that we put out as to why we've chosen to do this. This is absolutely critical. And we'll just make that comment now.
I think we've got different feedback if year 1 had been at 30.5% instead of 23. I mean, that drove, when people look at what was happening to the rates, that drove conversation in those submissions to quite a high degree. So,
just wanted to round back to the question that I asked. So in the supplementary paper that came to you, there was noted that this was something that you councillors should consider. That was in point 3, asset reserve adjustments. It did roll over a page in case you missed it in the rollover from the second bullet point to the next page. And as Rachel just said, there is 1% reduction in there. So can I just clarify what that 1% reduction would have been in relation to when we provided that advice?
$250,000 on the pump station.
On the pump station, yeah. And so the suggestion was that could happen in year 1. Tony's advice is that that's attracted against interest and not against debt, and so her advice is to do it once you're actually entering into repayment of debt. What would the risks be to us in doing that against interest, Tony?
There's no financial risk. What I'm suggesting to you is this is quite a bigger, broader question, because in year 1 it's quite small, and in year 3 it's a lot bigger, and I would just encourage councillors to put it in the pot of all the discussions on funding assets, so that you're not making a decision at this last minute about these kind of things, and that you can see the impact over the longer period. We have to decide which assets and for what period.
Alistair, then Lyndall.
If we take the Stead Street pump system, then basically if it comes out at $9 million, I don't know where the hell it's going to come out at, we divide that by the 80 years, it's $112,500 a year. So that's all we need to depreciate, isn't it?
quite that simple. Within that is a lot of,
That's my simple.
I know,
difference.
and I understand that. Within the total expenditure, the budget was 11 million.
Yeah.
And various components with different lengths of life. So we have to take all those pieces. and-
You've got different things, work it out on
Yeah,
different.
so our early analysis on it was 2%.
Yep.
As an average.
Well, two's 180,000. So, but what worries me a little bit, if you look at it, your asset register line, basically it keeps going up. So nothing's actually wearing out.
The asset reserve,
Sorry.
yes, it will keep going up. The longer assets don't wear out, the shorter ones that vehicles rotate very quickly. Science plant a bit longer, and then of course we've got this new asset which will keep building. So yes.
So I think also just to be aware is that although if you chose not to depreciate long-term assets, we'd still account for it, which means that the council will be operating in deficit technically, but you would not be rating for the depreciation.
Lyndall.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a slightly side question maybe. I'm just wondering when this conversation about when, how, if appropriate, the risks involved in delaying and making these decisions, how, when that will come to audit and assurance, I don't know, as a separate matter or as part of a broader
I
conversation?
support that, councillor. I think we talked initially in the workshop where we inform council on the options and the impact, and then that would need to go to audit and risk to be considered as a change in policy.
Yeah, okay. Sorry if I can. So the timing of that would be what are we talking? Yes.
Months. We're saying in the first part, pre the annual plan.
Yeah, okay.
So we would ideally have a workshop prior to Christmas, and have some direction. Because again, back to Councillor McQuail's interest in others in reserves, it needs to be discussed with why do we have reserves and how do we fund assets and who funds here. So
The risks associated with.
Yeah.
It's correct. Thank you.
Jeremy?
I think just in regards to the depreciation, I think there is an opportunity to maybe delay it for a couple of years. I just looking and I mean, it's not necessarily kicking the can down the road because we've got a brand new spectacular thing there that's going to do the job. So it's not like we're saying we're never going to depreciate it, but it's just a discussion that we can probably have in the future and make a really good call on it. And when we're trying to tighten our belt, we're not like we've got 100 million in debt trying to finance. We've got minimal debt anyway now, so it wouldn't be too hard to convince everybody that we can deal with this in the future, from my perspective. And if we're trying to find little gains here and there in the community, I think it'd be, and I'm happy to move that in that way for the next, based on these numbers that are in the recommendation.
Let's move it. I mean, move on.
You were moved and seconded?
If that's what you need, I'm not sure that's what you need, but.
sorry, can we ask him for clarification on
What are we moving?
What are we moving?
Deed street.
but what is the
Where
Where
from? Yeah.
Delay it for a couple of years.
well,
The confirmation of the infrastructure strategy is what I'm talking
Year
about.
two there.
I don't think that's recommendation is that we discuss it for adoption in the annual plan.
So that year one cost is this next, what we're dealing with long-term plan. If we said
Year
no
one is
to,
the long plan, and year two is the annual plan. Right?
Yeah.
The recommendation is that you defer your decision until the annual plan.
I'm bringing that forward to now.
You commit the council then to a new policy at this deliberation.
If it's not going to have impact this year, I'm not quite sure.
Well, that's well, that's this says year one. I'm just trying to read this.
1% impact.
1% on this year one of the LTP.
Yes,
So that it is affecting our rate decision now.
it is affecting the rates.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It does.
That's why it's in this paper.
Yeah. But we can't change that unless we change policy now.
Councillor
For
Fred,
this-
I'm suggesting to you that it would be better to be considered change of policy.
Yes, I agree. Just going to take
It's
away
a
the comment,
recommendation that
councillor.
we're happy to bring forward. We've noted it last time. We're bringing it to you again as an option.
Yeah.
But the recommendation is to consider it as in the end period.
Plans.
It does have a bigger impact. By the time you get to year 2, this decision is 1.5% and growing. So it's something that you want to address.
So you
Council would
withdrawing
be,
that?
well, no, I'd still like to discuss this because the council's got a legitimate conversation here around a 1% rate increase.
I'm
Or
just
decrease.
asking, when can we change policy? Do we need consult on it? We can make that policy, we change it here. And we could, they could influence the rate take this next year.
My understanding and advice from Stephen is online, is that you can make that decision at this table. My recommendation is that you need to probably have a better understanding of the long-term impact of that decision, not just in year 1.
Yes.
And I suppose that's when I'm asking, that it could be a cost saving in our cash flow, but will it be able to be implemented or send bills out
Actually, we
in November? When we deal with the long-term plan, that's the rate. We sign it on.
If I was to make this change now, it would have to flow from year 1 to year 10.
Yeah.
And it would impact every year.
Yeah.
And along the way, it would be considered by the auditors as an agreed policy change. We can't just choose to do 1 year and not do another, or one asset and not do another.
But we could change it in the annual plan again next year.
Oh,
Isn't
absolutely.
that- yeah.
It's What I'm suggesting is that we bring back to the council is the impact across the 10 years and agree on the assets that we're going to do this for. It's not just the pump station. In year 2, we'd be also looking at the compounding depreciation on the data and science. It actually has a bigger impact. The data and science depreciation adds up to 500,000 by the time you get to year 3 or year 4.
The vehicle one too.
Can I just be
Depreciation.
clear on the policy matter that you just raised, which is that you can't do it on one asset, you just said?
So we have to choose the assets as a group, and why we would choose that asset.
Assets as a group, not just, so not just Stead Street Pump Station.
For a good policy, you would be saying why you were choosing it. It would be because it's a long-lived asset. So in fact, all assets, for example, of a similar nature would be then not funded, is my suggestion.
Is there anything that prevents the council from deciding to apply a policy about depreciation to a specific asset, such as Stead Street, which is a large and expensive asset by our standards?
So Stead Street has to be depreciated. Whether we have to put rate funding into it is the question. And I've made my point, I leave it with the councillors to decide.
Can I please come back on my Stead Street thing? I heard over here from that it was a Riversdale approach. But the thing is that basically, I knew it was you, basically if we do that, drop it back to 112,000, there's still either 74 years if we take it out of the thing for a 4-year period, where it is compound interest going into that for that period. So surely we got to be going okay.
Look,
The depreciation will be calculated when the asset is complete. Our estimate is 11 million at 2% plus little, because there's other short-lived assets within that. We haven't used the accounting standards to calculate the depreciation. So we will calculate the depreciation. It's simply whether the councillors choose to put the money aside in year 1 or not. And as I suggest, you can't have the policy that is year by year. You want to have an agreement on that going forward.
what I'm hearing around the table is I think we want staff to go and have a look at this and bring it back next week, and then we can make a decision. I don't think we've got enough information right at the moment. But what I'm hearing, we can make a decision at a due time. We can review it annually. So is that the feeling? We'd like to see a little bit more on that?
It's got to be done in LTP. It's got to be done LTP. Not
Sorry, no, I wasn't taking my head at that. In terms of annually, what I'm suggesting is you could introduce the policy for the annual plan. After consideration, wouldn't recommend you keep changing it. It needs to be really consistent and based on a set of principles as to why you've decided it.
That's the policy, right?
That's the policy piece. The council, I ask the councillors to consider whether you want to make that decision today and commit for next week. It's just a little bit late because the auditors are starting on Monday. So whether you really want to commit to 10 years of this.
From my understanding, there's quite a few territorials going down this line at the moment. So it's whether we look at it now as part of the LTP or not. What do we guidance on the table and we want to go with this? Morris?
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused. I think you need more information from the staff on this before we make a decision.
No, that's what I'm suggesting, yeah. So it's not binding us to anything, but perhaps we can get a wee bit of clarification before Wednesday on the pros and cons.
So what day do we give the information to the auditors?
Could we throw another $250,000 lease reserves into that? Just offset the depreciation for 1 year while we sort it out.
That's the agreement. It's 11 people, 12 people need to decide.
I'm really
Is that a way of dealing with the function of it, and regardless of where it comes from within the budget, it's allowing that function to happen, what Jeremy's suggested, or is it what we have to?
Actually, on reflection, councillor, I don't know how to do that. Reserves, well, technically on a high level, I can understand your maths. The purpose of the reserves and leaseholders to offset spent expenditure in the areas that we've talked about in infrastructure. So we can't take the leasehold reserve and put it into the general pot, which is really, you can pick another reserve, but that one would be.
No, it's around flood protection.
Uh,
It's designed to be paid. I know it's gonna be.
if you haven't noted we have to consult with the catchment chairs yet.
Come back.
They're going to be looking for clarity around the use of reserves, and they would be expecting, I imagine, the use of reserves. We'll be supportive of the use of reserves in the area, maybe not so much on the Stead Street pump station.
But your auditors are in gear by the time the 20th we meet with the catchment liaison committees.
Yeah.
Audit's underway. They have a lot to do. We've made a lot of changes. We've actually got to ask the auditors if they can complete their audit in their specified time.
Right, I've got John, I've got Lyndall, I've got Eric, and I've got Morris.
Let's chuck a cat amongst the pigeons. What are the targeted rate for dealing with Stead Street?
Too hard at this point.
And who would be the targeted ones?
It's up for discussion, but it seems we haven't resolved the history before we move forward. It's just.
It's good left field thinking. Good.
Lyndall.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm just looking at the paper that we have in front of us and trying to get my head around what we're actually talking about. The paper says that depreciation is budgeted for during years 1 and 2 for the long-term plan. But an option is to not pay depreciation on the capital expenditure for Stead Street. Modelling, everybody's favourite word, would need to be done to assess the full impact of these changes if the council wished to proceed with this option. However, in ballpark terms, it would result in a 1% reduction in rates for year 1 and a 1.5% reduction in year 2. Right? That's what's in black and white in front of me. Given the significant long-term financial implications of such an approach, it is suggested that this be considered as part of an overall review of the council's approach to reserves. That is where I'm at, actually. You know, we need to have that conversation in that reserves bigger conversation, and I think we should leave it as is stated in the paper.
Eric.
Yes.
Lyndall's just asked my question.
Even though it wasn't a question, sorry.
Well, yeah, no, well, what is a good reason not to delay? I'll rephrase the question. Yeah, tell me why we need to do this now and why it's important or why it's a good idea to delay. Just crisp it up for me so a simple man without Riversdale economics can understand.
Just to clarify, there's a wee bit of confusion, say year one and year two. It's sort of saying, oh, we can do this and fix year one, two, so it's probably not quite right.
I've got Morris then myself.
Hang on, can I have an answer?
I think it's all written there, councillor, the benefit to ratepayers in year one.
1%, that's what we're talking about. It's just 1%. There's nothing else.
And 1.5 in year.
Yeah, righto, okay. Thank you.
I think
Now I've got that.
That works for me.
By year two, we would have had this discussion. And
Yeah, righto.
agree with policy.
So can we just be clear about what the risk is of us doing it in year one?
Yeah, that's part of what.
The risk in year one,
Councillor Spice.
I would suggest to you is simply that all the people around this table are not comfortable with the fact that the outer years impact, or are not understanding, or maybe not wanting to make a decision on deliberations on policy change. That's my advice.
I've got Morris then myself.
Well, no, I think I agree with that. I agree with what Lyndall and Eric said. I don't think we should make a change now. We should consider it when we review the reserves. So I don't want to see any change at the moment.
Well, when I look at 1% and 1.5%, I do have a contrary view, given the direction that the public have given us on trying to reduce rates in a very tough economic environment. So, yeah, why are we waiting? There's 1%, that's 1.5%. Can be reviewed at any time. I'm in favour of looking at that right now.
Thanks.
Can we do that?
Now we're looking for direction about what we do. So the Chief Financial Officer is saying, look at this in the new financial year, which means not to have a 1% rate increase in the new financial year.
So can I just clarification, it's 1% off the 13.4, or it'll be 14.4
Yes.
if we,
Off the 13.4.
okay, righto. Yep.
I'm wondering whether Tony can give us something before the end of the week and whether we do an email-y type direction. Got the auditors coming on Monday. I've sensed that people haven't quite got enough information here now, but I think the discussion is worth having.
I don't agree. I think we should follow the line we've taken already, and I think that we seem to be pushing it. We're getting this information through email and making a decision. So I'm not comfortable with it. I think there's more to be discussed. I want to know all of the different aspects rather than just 1%.
Right, I think we'll.
What about Wednesday?
Good, Mr. Chairman, just before we do that, I'd just like to know with the auditors, so we're talking about changing policy in deliberations, is that right? Okay, so whether that's appropriate or not, is it something that the auditors pick up on in their report to us? And I'm worried about the slippery slope doing this sort of thing. So there are just a couple of concerns I'd like to address if we're going to go forward with this and refer next week.
Well, I think we'll go around the room. Who would like more information before we settle this issue, and who was saying no, leave it till next financial year? So with Eric.
Yeah, there is quite a variety of views, and I think some more information. We don't have to make the decision today. I'm for another few days to let us get to the bottom of this.
Lyndall.
Yeah, no, I'm not up for delaying it any further. I think we've got information and, you know, I'm comfortable with getting on with it, actually.
So I'm not clear what that means, councillor, I'm sorry, what?
So that's against.
So what's the?
So the question before us is, do you want more information from the staff to make a decision about whether we reduce the rate by a further 1% next year or not?
No, I don't.
You don't, thank you.
Okay, right. Morris?
No, well, I think we should do what the recommendation in this second paragraph says, is that we should deal with it as part of our overall approach to reserves.
Against? John?
Yeah, I'm comfortable to proceed with the recommendation here around dealing with the reserves and just making that.
Against?
I'm in agreement with the previous three.
Against? Peter?
I think I'm not comfortable in deciding policy on the, I'm sorry, I think it's a separate discussion. No.
Mind you, we would ask for more information.
Yes.
You were against? Paul?
Information, similar.
More information.
Against?
Yeah, I'm keen for more info, but I'd be happy to throw in a bit more money in from the reserves to offset it when we make that decision. So it doesn't cost the community anyway, well, we reckon out.
So that's majority or against, without Phil, who's not here. So we've got 5 for more information, then we've got 1, 2, 3, and we've got 6 for against. So I guess we've got in the room, we're not going to proceed with that at this stage.
Yes, I just want clarity. That decision we just made means that we are doing what's in this paragraph.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a 1.5% reduction, and we're going to deal with how we look at this in policy in the annual plan. Yeah, well, that lot of information rolling through there.
That's not off the table, it's just.
No.
Yeah, but we're actually looking at, so by doing this, we will have a 1.5% reduction next year.
No, councillors, be clear there, if you're looking at the policy in the new financial year, the policy will take effect in the following financial year. So,
So would that be?
so if you want a 1% reduction in the long-term plan's year 1 budget, you need information.
Okay, yeah,
now.
More information. Right, so we now have 6, take 1 off. So that is actually a majority in favour of more information. So, very good, good democratic.
But does that mean we then have to address it because we just have the information?
We get more information and then we'll make that decision.
So
When will that
that's
happen?
the next question. Next Wednesday, is it?
You'll be in Japan land.
This Wednesday, wouldn't it?
Yeah, this Wednesday.
Can't do that.
2 days.
It cannot be next Wednesday, it has to be this Wednesday.
Yeah, fine.
This Wednesday.
I'm sure we could have an extraordinary meeting if we have to of early next week.
No, this is about the time it's going to take to get the thinking together on this. I think the issues for this matter will be risk and modelling, and we just need to have a conversation about how long it's going to take.
So there may be no change, but I think council does need that information, and we'll work with that.
And I've noted councillor McPhail's reference to that as well.
Right, now, so we're at the stage where we can improve the infrastructure strategy. I think people might try to do it before, but we have second for that. No. So you want now to low on the table?
I'm not seconding anything for that, thanks.
Well, until we decide that, we probably can't totally confirm it, so we'll leave that that's low on the table.
To lay it on the table.
I think that would be good.
I'll move with the recommendations lie on the table for the next meeting.
Well, Mr. Chairman, no, I don't think it's too long. I think the staff have given an indication that the kind of information you want and the time frame that we've got is not possible to be done. So unless that's wrong, then what we're asking the staff to do is completely unreasonable, it seems to me.
Well, I'm getting the feeling that we want some clarification on whether it's possible or not. And yeah,
That's all very well, but I mean, you can't get the information in the time required, then, we won't be able to do that. I just think it's really shooting from the hip, it's really foolish. Sorry, it's a pretty much split decision. John was, just clarifying things, and he was the one that changed it, and it's very divided. It's almost that we should maintain the status quo because it's such a divided council on it. If it was very clear one way or the other, then that's fair enough. But I'm very uncomfortable with that.
So I support what Councillor Rodway is saying there, the way that this has swung over the last few minutes, and I'm really uncomfortable with that. And the indication I was getting from what I was hearing from staff was that there was a need, not that it's impossible, but there was a need for caution. And I think if we're having this presented to us on Wednesday, is that correct? This coming Wednesday?
not necessarily.
Rushing it for the sake of
Well,
it's ideological.
So I think staff, so we raised this matter was raised last week. I raised it so that we could address it. The staff advice is that this is not advisable in terms of setting a policy, but I think what I hear is a desire for the 1% rates reduction. So I don't know what to say in terms of how that might be dealt with. I think it's good sense for a policy decision to be made that is actually considers the impact on our deficit over a decade, which is what this does, and the longevity of that, and how we might deal with all of our long-term assets. And I think that that's a reasonably good issue. The fact that we know that there is an impact in the next 2 years potentially on the rates, I think is also the matter. So I hear Councillor McPhail's point, which is there another way for us to fund the depreciation? That may be an easier answer than attempting to come back with an entire policy rethink by Wednesday. So the question of whether or not there is a further $250,000 and whether that's prudential might be a quicker answer to you than looking at a total policy review. Would that satisfy your concerns?
Would satisfy me.
Me too.
We have a consensus on that, but we'll look at that rather than the more contentious one. Is that all good?
Yep.
So
Yes, no.
does that mean we can pass the infrastructure, maybe because it's likely to be more reserve change than
Or we're looking for different information.
So we will come back with the answer to Councillor McPhail's question, which is whether we fund the depreciation from the first year from reserves, and we will come back with a policy conversation in the new financial year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPhail.
But if that
I'll just write the check out.
if Councillor McPhail fails, then
It will just be
where are
Councillor
we sitting?
Well, that's
Well,
just-
we would be struggling councillors to come back with a policy change within 2 days.
Oh, I can't do that.
And there's more than just a
Unless
dead
it's-
street. This is
Yeah.
a major.
Yeah,
that's why
major
it's-
approach.
I think that's a good thing.
And then
Tanya.
you can deal with them.
Thank you, councillor. So I am asking for direction at this meeting. It's a deliberations meeting, and we're deliberating on the finances, the budget, and the rates, so that we can provide for you completed documents to go to audit and be agreed. Well, we're recommending on the 19th. On the 19th, we're going to ask you to agree all those documents that we're going to prepare between then and now to be audited, to be adopted on the 10th of July. We do need this whole week to do that. So thank you for changing your mind on that, or finding another solution. We do need the infrastructure strategy, the financial strategy. All of those things need to be updated and reviewed and be prepared and signed off to audit on Monday. So what I understand from this meeting is we will find 250,000 in year one as a placeholder for future policy, presumptive that there will be a policy change in the future equivalent, and that we can continue with the financials as provided here, that everybody was happy in the end with the reserves bar this last adjustment for 250,000. And that we can turn this into a final set of documents for the meeting on 9th of June.
Yes.
Yes, I think we have confirmation on that. Yep.
Yeah.
John, you're.
Just a question to make sure I'm clear on the whole thing, so it's completely not to this, but the capital value change, when is that?
So that's the list of
The next-
recommendations,
the next
which
matter.
might be the next step.
You've got clear direction?
Sorry, just one thing you said you're going to find us this.
Yes,
Sitting in the bank.
we have to go back to the reserves and have another look at the reserves to suggest.
Are you going to propose where this might come from, or is this a definite, do we not even need to discuss it on the day because you're going to find it? Is that what you're saying?
The instruction is to go and look at it originally, and we do need to come back to council with what it could be, what the alternatives could be. My original thought was the chair's clear direction that he didn't want to increase the general reserve, but we're not increasing it in year one. So it can't be from there. We need to look at, yes, we need to come back with recommendation on what we could use for 250,000. The leasehold, I don't see as appropriate because of the seriousness of the catchments. But, yeah, we'll have to discuss that.
Yes, thank you, that's what I want.
Lyndall?
Yeah, and I'm sure that you will also provide us with the information about the impact of the reserve that we'll be taking it from over the long term.
Yes.
Because it has an impact at that side as well, and we really need to see that.
No, thanks, Tony. Let's leave it with Tony. She's been given direction. Right. So we now go through recommendations 1 to 7, or we'll go next. Where are we, Rachel?
So through the chair, we now move back to set recommendations at the front of the report. For convenience, we've transposed the recommendations of some updates that were in the original deliberations report to the supplementary report, so that you can work your way through. And so some of it relates to matters you discussed last week, whereas other matters relate to the discussions today. So the first recommendation, noting that you've already moved and seconded, recommendation 1 is recommendation 2, which is to confirm the changes to the forecasting assumptions. And you might recall we discussed that last Wednesday, and they were the changes to the marine fee, forecast return on investments, and cost factors or inflation adjustments, which you worked through last week and appeared to have some level of comfort with. So this is formal confirmation.
Sorry, what's the?
So in the supplementary report, the list of recommendations in recommendation 2, and what I'm referring back to is the initial deliberations report and page 12 of that report specifically, in terms of revised forecasting assumptions for the marine fee, forecast return on investments, and cost factors on inflation. And we did talk about this last Wednesday and indicate a reduction of those.
Finally, recommendation 2, Chair.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Peter. Any further discussion? Put the recommendation, all in favour will say aye.
So that brings us to recommendation 3, which is confirming the budget adjustments. So that is a combination of what you've spoken about this morning in terms of the use of reserves and previous discussions around changes in income and expenditure adjustments. I think it's a combination, which is one of the reasons we want to bring the whole package back to you.
So that presumes we're not making another policy decision.
Yeah, but we can later.
I don't think we should be, but I'm just saying that if we accept the wording of that
Perhaps we should amend it to with the exception of the matter still being
Debated.
debated, yes. Jan, you might have better words for that.
So we're confirming on the basis of the discussion we just had, basically, which could lead to some small changes perhaps.
I'll move on that basis, Chair.
I'll second it.
Seconded, all in favour? Aye.
The fourth recommendation relates to the discussion in the paper around the use of the lease area reserves. So we did seek legal advice around this. You recall there is the special lease area policy, and that outlines that we must consult with the catchment liaison committees prior to the council making a final decision on the use of reserves. And what we've proposed in the report is that council puts forward an email to each of the catchment liaison committee chairs after these deliberations outlining what we're looking to do, and ask for feedback before your meeting on the 19th. And then, of course, there will be further opportunity for discussion on that when the chairs come in on the 20th of June.
Just my one query on that, when it's saying staff consult, I would have thought perhaps we needed some governance to be part of that conversation.
So if you're doing it by an email, how do you do that?
Get Pete to the site and old fashioned. Pete is the chair of the regional services.
Yeah, I'm happy to be part of that, Chairman. But also stress not just the chairs, the committees too, they trip their committees.
Yes, sorry, I may not have read that part out. It was to send the email to the chairs, but then ask them to send it to all the committees.
Yep.
I've got John, then Lyndall.
So I'll just reverse the bus up. This is going to the auditors on the 17th. Is it a consult or is it more of a, this is what the plan, guys? Or does it come back to the fact we still have to have the discussion around, right, we said to set aside 1.8, how does that look? How do we do it? So I guess how we frame that is going to be really important to let them know that council has only approved the budget and they will only approve the process of it, not that this is earmarked, because we can understand how the history of how this LTP has gone the last 6 months. It's not going to take much petrol on the fire to make it.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. On the back of John's comments, actually, I was going to say this isn't an email conversation at all. Given the temperature from some of the chairs, I think it should be an in-person conversation immediately. First off, I think I'll be inviting them if you can to have the conversation face to face rather than just sending them an email. But the capacity for that might be a challenge. So
that might from governments.
So Peter might need to.
Well, I'm happy to.
But anyway,
time this week. Absolutely.
It's a face-to-face conversation.
I think it has to be from a communication point of view as well, and it could be a mixed Zoom in-person one. I'm happy to front the discussions along with Peter. But what we were proposing is well within the gambit of those lease reserves, but it would be very rude not to actually talk to the people that are involved in those committees. That, like, at the end of the day, a lot of that was government funding. So the percentage that's of ownership is not the whole amount, but I'm very much in favour of having an open and frank conversation. And I believe that those committees will understand and will come to the party, but let's not have that conversation. Any further, Jeremy?
Just in regards, I'm surprised we had that legal advice on this policy. It's very clear. Again, looking at legal bills, because we've designed that, we've talked with certain catchment committees. It's very clear. We just talk to them and hopefully get an agreement. But at the end of the day, one of the last lines in that policy says, the council, this is the council's money. And that was, so I just want to make sure that they know that. Maybe not all chairs know that, but we spend a lot of time on it.
They just don't accept it.
I know, no, but there are some, they do. They said, well, we're going hard, but we knew it was council's money. Eventually they said that. So it's pretty simple. Just talk to them and you need to sell it, the idea, and at the end of the day, if they don't quite like it, well, that's a policy that deals with that. Very clear policy.
I'll move recommendation for Chairman in light of our discussions and emails and that quiet stuff.
So perhaps you'd be happy to add and governance to that line, which was talking just staff.
In person.
Eric's happy to second the amended motion. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just about the meeting that's on the 20th of June with catchment liaison committees, what will the role of that committee be? Will that be a time when we can discuss this with them, or presumably they will have some feedback by then?
But I guess it's too late for our deliberations. That's the point of the earlier meeting. It's
Committee
So the consultation is really just this email to them with you and Peter Prince.
Yeah.
Having a
a
telephone
broader
conversation.
meeting on so will still take place here.
So probably consultation is
Can you just read out what we've got sitting in front of you?
Direct staff and governance consult with the catchment liaison committees regarding the proposed use of reserves.
And I think it was also, wasn't it, sort of, as I picked up, that's, if it's possible, to do it in person.
Yeah, so again,
If it was possible, to do it in person.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think that's been picked up by staff,
Yeah,
but we'll
not
probably
an
have to
email.
give the option to some people, as we do with our own councillors, to come by Zoom if they have to. Jeremy?
To clarify, we'll exactly know where those dollars are going to get spent within the reserve money. They will be looking for clarity here. So we need to have that information, which doesn't make it easy.
On a cash flow basis.
Yeah.
so. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Consultation is a special meaning in law. It means you go into the process without a fixed position in mind. So that's something to be considered.
Good point. Okay, I've got a recommendation that's been moved and seconded. If there's no further discussion on that recommendation, all in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Against? No, carried. Okay. Item 5.
Through you, Chair, this one relates to the rating review and has come from the items there are what were included in Appendix 2 of the original report, which was a recommendation by staff to essentially proceed with a transition option to the rating review. So this is confirming changes to the revenue and financing policy and related documents. Is Stephen on the line, Tony, or did you want to take this?
I think Stephen is online. Stephen, are you there?
Yep.
Yes, yes, I am.
So this is an unsurreal world that we live in when we ask somebody.
Are you out there? Used to be called crazy when you did that. Then go to crystal ball.
Would you be able to take us through the recommendations, please, Stephen? These are the ones from last week.
I think, Stephen, you did suggest over the weekend that recommendation D, we might have to tighten that up a little bit and change it to wording like undertake further consideration of rating options, including the various matters listed during the 2024-25 year, just to be a bit tighter than that. I'll let you cover that off.
Right, okay, we'll start off. So we started the consultation with the flood infrastructure plan, the flood protection rate, and excuse me, the process we've gone through has led us to a need to separate the parts of that. And so that there would be a catchment planning rate, a river management rate, and a flood infrastructure protection rate, and we would continue with the land drainage rates. So the catchment planning rate is the work done in-house. The river management rate is effectively the catchment rates. And the flood infrastructure is the new investment in flood infrastructure, and land drainage is business as usual. So that's the first part of it, and so that analysis and the funding needs analysis needs to come to the conclusion as to how we would do that rate, and that would reflect what's in C of the agenda there. Sorry, did someone say something? No. Modifying the revenue financing policy to reflect that, but also to make sure that currently the policy says that the general rates shouldn't be differentiated. It's a correction of something that needs to happen. The targeted rate is already able to be differentiated, and that just creates options for us in the future. It doesn't change anything in itself. And then there's the transition element to it. Using those four new rates that I talked about under A, catchment planning excluding WIO would on year one go to 100% general rate, and there would be no change thereafter. The catchment planning WIO rate would not change from what it is at the moment. So there's an element of catchment planning costs that sit in that budget. River management, excluding WIO, so that's our catchments, would go from a 30% general rate to a 50% general rate in year one, and then in year two, that would come out of the general rate and become 100% new targeted rate across the region, and in effect removing the current 140 catchment rates. Option 4, river management weight rate WIO, they carry on as they are now with no change. And then the flood infrastructure investment, the new rate, would start off 100% new targeted rate to fund the costs of new flood infrastructure, and that would cover insurance, cover the depreciation interest costs, and any budgeted debt that was collected from rates for that rate. D provides for consideration of options, further consideration of options in the coming 12 months. And E is modifying policies to reflect what we're doing in the transition. So stop there. Yep.
Right, just for clarification, one is the 100% general rate. That's pretty much about the staffing. That's correct.
It is for all staffing and overheads.
And the second lot, which is the river management, that's transitioning to the 50%. And when we talk about a targeted rate, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the flat rate. It could be different.
Year 2 is to be decided, Chair, in the transition. So while we're saying a targeted rate, we're assuming it'll be a targeted rate of some type. Very strong recommendation that the council has considered that the capital value option is the option, and the decisions we're looking at then with the ratepayers is there a differential, as Councillor McPhail said, and should we be looking at going back to ratepayers and saying we proposed a regional wide rate, do you feel more strongly about a local rate as in a catchment / FMU versus a region? I felt reasonable, your feedback might be different, but where I was, and I did a number of meetings there was reasonable acceptance of the capital value, but there was a desire to keep a local component, which was very much enforced by the catchment chairs, and there was not a lot of people, but some people asking about a differential for location. So I would suggest that those two things, what we go back to discuss is there going to be a differential for location, and would local be preferred to regional? And so year 2 isn't decided, it's suggested here that it would be a targeted rate, because whether it be region-wide or local, it's still likely to be a targeted rate.
John, then Paul.
Just some clarity, river management year 150, year 2, 100. Randall's team, did I hear correctly, the works they do, the cost falls into the following year, so if we go hard on sorting the flood banks out, is that going to land in year 2, so it's an even spread for the community?
Only the capital works lands in year 2.
Okay.
The operating work. Actually, in terms of Stephen, this subsection 2, number 2, year 2, 100% targeted rate, that is actually to be decided. That could well end up as a 50-50 targeted rate, or a 70-30 targeted rate, or it could be 100. That is the one that's undecided.
So under this recommendation, we could be loading up part of the community with carrying the can for a lot of maintenance.
What I'm suggesting to you is that
in year 1, I guess I'm asking this probably.
So for year 1, the 50%.
Yeah.
In year 1, we are taking those reserves to offset that. That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So year 1, the split currently, so if we read river management as river works, which is our in-house term, but throughout the regional councils, it's normally considered river maintenance, river management. It's currently 30% and 70. This is just a small shift, if you like, towards the middle. Same policy, but a different weighting. Year 2 is to be decided under river management. It's the one that we're going to go back and have another discussion about, well, further clarify options under year 2. River management YL doesn't change. It's to be the same as it is. Flood infrastructure, year 1 targeted rate, capital value. In year 2, no change. What it means is no proposed change from year 1. I'll just take you back to the catchment planning. It is currently 40-60. So again, this is a shift to take the people into all the overheads, and rather than force it through multi-level step right down to those 140 classifications, it's to say, hey, catchment planning sits alongside hazard planning and regional planning and every other integrated planning, and that it's reasonable and appropriate that that be funded by the general rates. So this is, the transition is very much the status quo with some moves towards the original proposal.
Paul.
Just for clarification, this is not moving the individual FNU buckets to one big bucket.
No.
Because we don't want that.
Well, it's not, no. So that the original
Just needed to
proposal
double
was,
confirm, when we go.
the original proposal was all 4 of these into one rate. 4 pieces. Yes, 4 pieces, 3 pieces plus trade. This proposal was to say we're going to leave the pieces and move each piece separately in the right direction. If that is the right direction. So we're asking you to decide on catchment planning and flood infrastructure, and asking you to decide to do nothing effectively but move the percentage on the middle one, on the river one. We're still going to have 140 classifications for one more year.
Whatever.
Peter?
Yeah, I'm reasonably happy with that, but I would say what a transition means. Transition to me means that you're going towards a predetermined destination. We need to be really clear with that. I'm just a bit worried about some of the language around how we might get there or, you know, so, yeah, to clarify exactly what that destination is, I think it's.
Yeah, good point. And I have, through you, Chair, suggested that we have to be clear on whether we're making a decision to delay or a decision to
Yeah, that's absolutely.
And what I'm suggesting here is we're making a delayed decision on the river management piece. We're suggesting that we move it to 50-50, but we go back out and ask more questions about do you want local or regional? In my mind, there's two questions if the councillors agreed. Is it local or regional that was the issue? And was there any real desire amongst people for a simplified differential?
So we're agreeing the capital value, and now we're talking about the discussion being whether the funds are collected and spent on that river or the funds are collected and spent regionally. Have I clarity on that? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Moving towards
The destination is.
Morris, Julie, Ellis and myself and John. One problem to say.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, it's not taking up a little long. The information you sent out on Friday contained about 70 example rates. Is that data still relevant now, or is that going to be changed?
No, absolutely. Those were the very latest modelling done on the very latest budget.
Thank you, that's good. Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, on Sunday afternoon when it was raining, I took that data and put it into a spreadsheet and then made some graphs, which illustrate, I think, where I would like to go to. First,
I feel like I'm at school.
Yeah, well, you are.
Put your hands on your head. Hands on your heads, everybody.
I wasn't happy in high school. Embarrassing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Morris.
I'm with you, Peter. The lunch bell needs to go.
Thanks, Morris.
And certainly,
Sorry, Stephen, you can't see.
Here you are, Stephen.
I'll just look over your shoulder.
so the first graph on the top page, this one here, with the red circles, is I should explain, on the vertical axis are the rates, so those are dollar rates, 4,000. And on the horizontal axis is the capital value. Thank you. Yes. So the first graph, this one with the dots on it, shows what the current rates are. So the CV rate exists. So you can see above the line there are four actually, but three in particular, people that are paying a lot more than the average. So they're the ones that are living by the river. They're paying a lot in river rates and that sort of thing. The second graph.
Can I ask a question, mate?
No, because you was throwing me off my.
Put your hand up.
You've got to remember that when we want to interrupt.
The second graph shows you what happens when you go to CD versus the CD is the advertised proposal. Yeah. And that puts everybody on the same line. That's the capital value. So that reinforces, I think, what we've been saying is that makes it very, very much fairer. If you go over the page, it's basically the same as the second graph. That's just a lower rate per property, but everybody is still pretty much on the line. Now the last one, which is called CD versus a transition, which is what I am advocating that we should go to actually as the destination. Peter was talking about where we're getting to. This still requires the people who get a lot of benefit from riverworks beside them They're still paying a little bit more than average, and I think that's fair. Jeremy and I were talking before about wet feet and dry feet, so if if you've got stop means going to protect you from getting wet feet, as opposed to somebody who's living on the hill who's never going to get wet feet, then I think that needs to be recognised. So I hope that's helpful. I don't know what your question was.
My question is, those three properties, do they have floodbacks on? Because from what I'm seeing with rating, it's more in your location against the river rather than the protection you have. So there are people out there that are paying a lot in rates that actually have no flood protection apart from absorbing all the water to slow the water down for the community. So I actually don't think the 140 rating is actually treating people by the river fairly, because it doesn't go down the river and go, oh, you pay more, you pay less. It is, you're on the river, you're going to pay more. So I think that hasn't been, that part of the discussion has not come through council to this point.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, and I didn't attempt to answer that, but what I tried to show was that I think the transition option is the best one we should go for out of all those four that were on the information that was sent out, because that's fairest overall.
Thanks, Morris.
So Jeremy, Alistair, then myself.
Quick question. I asked the other day in regards with the transition around the UAGC, and I said, oh, well, is it in the transition, will it just go up the natural rate? Under a transition, I said, oh, will it be the 13% or whatever? And I thought I got a yes, but it's no.
Year two.
Yeah.
Year two.
Year two.
Yeah. So
It goes, no, it's going down though.
Well, I suppose it's part of the discussion. So the proposal itself was for a reduction in year one from 143 down to 20.
Yeah.
And as Councillor Rodway has pointed out, the transition effectively mutes both those going up and going down. So the proposed transition was to leave, to not the double negative. Did you see in here that if we start with the status quo, the UAGC would go to 162?
Yes.
Yeah. So
that's what I was asking.
The transition was then offered to you was to leave it where it is rather than go up or go down. And year one is to stay where it is. And in year two, the transition decision, I suppose, is for those in the room, is whether it goes down to 120 or whether we adjust the 120 by the next year's percentage and carry on then where we were. And if we did that, you'd be looking at 120 plus 13% in year two. Which would be 135. Yeah.
Just on, when are we going to discuss the UAGC then?
No, I suppose as part of this meeting, as part of the revenue and financing policy.
No, I'm happy with the catchment the planning one, but I am concerned that we're going to leave the 140 rates this year when we've had conversations about flattening things out, perhaps having a direct benefit and an indirect benefit. We also have created a few anomalies with the Wallistown discussion we've had. There was an assumption that if we did the catchment-wide thing, that would be picked up. If we stick with this, we've got an issue there, and probably with flood links and the wire as well. But I'm worried if we miss this opportunity, and we've got a lot of direction that actually the current system isn't that fair, and it's not. That we don't make some transition this year, that it probably won't happen at all. So I've got some real concerns about that one. And also the flood infrastructure one, we've had a lot of feedback of saying some people get more of a direct benefit rather than just the flat rate that we actually talked about. So
Chair, this year the flood infrastructure rate is rating as Dead Street Pump Station is the majority by far, with a little remainder for the balance of the other capital projects that we've undertaken, being the hopeful flooding in the east and south and flood beams. So direct benefit this time, I felt that we agreed earlier on was for everybody in Southland. the response we had at the time was that we would rate across the region for that.
So I'm less concerned about that one with the ability to perhaps bring in a targeted rate at a later date over Steer Street. But I am concerned about the status quo for the 140 rates and not moving at all. And, you know, a lot of people have come in and said, well, we all agreed that everybody should pay something. But, you know, also people who are behind the flood bank do have a bigger benefit than people on the hill. But if we're not doing anything, my worry is next year nothing will happen. The opportunity will have been lost. And we've actually spent a lot of time on this. So, is it still time to do something like that? And it could be quite simple if you had, you know, direct benefit, indirect, then flat rate. Because at the end of the day, we're going to collect the same amount of money. But at the moment, you've got all these aberrations.
Stephen might like to answer that.
Yeah. So I think what we've proposed here, at the moment, we've kept the catchment rates in place for the first year, except we've changed that percentage that's funded from general rate. But 50% of the current catchment rate budget will be funded by the catchment using the existing classification system. So that element of a direct benefit is in place for the coming year. What we then do in the following year, I actually go down to clause D in that resolution, is we're actually going to invest more options. And for the purpose of being able to complete our accounting requirements, we need to have some certainty over what year 2 would be like for the purpose of preparing budgets and rates resolutions and those sorts of things. We've got it in there as a 100% new targeted rate. That's showing the direction that we started on with the proposal. But in effect, D, in my mind, creates the opportunity for us to reconsider that allocation. So does that sort of
That gives me some comfort, Stephen, but I can see some of the aberrations in TR now. We're not going to be having captures this year, but at least if they know it's going to change next year, that may help a little bit. Peter.
Just thanks, Stephen, for that. Just want to clarify, when we use the word further options, that means further options in heading towards a specified targeted capital value, so that destination doesn't waver.
Yes. Through you, Chair, I think, as been said, the messaging is important on clarity. There are many good reasons for the transition, and in this first year, having all the catchments on an equal basis was, we discussed, also important, which includes Waiau, Te Anau, and the other catchment. While we go back to ratepayers and talk about this local piece, it seemed to me that, again, that the local part was one that concerned people, not wanting to give up that local view and control. The wet feed or dry feed thing does take quite considerable discussion as to where, if that was to happen, where it would happen, and that's another consultation. So I appreciate that we could lose momentum, and I think it's important that we're committed to continue this immediately and clarify the next steps urgently as to what we can communicate with the ratepayers. I think that going back to ratepayers and saying that we have listened to your desire, some of them won't be happy, of course, but the fact that we're allowing those outliers, as Councillor Rodway pointed out, there's outliers at both ends, those that were going to come down and those that were going to go up. This transition budget transition proposal acknowledges that and says that if you were $250, you're now $150. Yeah. And that might You know, and if you were 20,000, you're now 10,000. And if you were going to go down 5,000, you're now only going to go down 2,000. So it does build a buffer, and Mr. Michael, it's Michael's last name, ICC.
Day.
I was going to say May, I know Michael May. Michael Day did say transition would help people make decisions as well about properties. So hence the recommendation. So we need to be aware of the loss of momentum. We need to make sure that we are clear in our next steps, what we're asking for feedback again on.
Thanks, Chairman. I just want to say that, yes, to what you've just said, except for the maintaining the UAGC, because actually out my constituents are quite seriously impacted by that figure. So I appreciate why and all the reasoning. I just want to make the point that actually my constituents will, that's actually a big effect on mine. Ours, because there's 6 of us. Thanks.
Anything further at this stage?
Mr. Chairman, could I just clarify? So what this 5C is saying, C15, is that we're going to use the transition with adjusted budget. Is that right? All right, I think that's good. Thank you.
Well, that's what I missed you.
You did miss me. Yeah. Sorry, Chair. And you know, Riversdale simplicity here. We've got year one, there's no change in the YL rate. Now, if we go up 10%, then they're going to be charged 10% more, right?
Sorry, no change in the policy.
Structure. Yes, structure. The other thing I do believe that for some reason our constituents didn't really cotton on to what we were wanting with the value rates and things like that. Maybe it was too many things coming out at once. And I think that's why the submissions came through, that they wanted to delay a year and be more, get more educated and familiar. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to start voting on?
Mr. Chairman. Just to be, just so everyone's clear, my intention at this stage is that what we've got in C would somehow be reflected in the revenue and financing policy. So that document would show formally that this is what the transition plan is.
Quite soon.
That's good. So,
which is point E, right?
so catchment planning excluding the YL, one year 100% rate, year 2 no change, and the YL staying at no change. Somebody happy to move that recommendation? So this is really the management type stuff where it would be put forward. So you're on page this is C1 and 2 we're looking at the moment. Recommendations.
So we haven't done.
All of them.
5A to C.
Yeah.
Right, that's right, yeah. So
That's
modify the funding needs analysis. Maybe we do that A and B first, perhaps. So Neville's happy to move that, which is 5A and B.
Yes.
Okay.
So just
do them all at once.
Why are we doing C?
Well, yeah. Just I thought that's what Eric was saying. But are you happy to do C as well?
Yes, I am.
And D and E.
Right. Okay.
You're gonna vote more
Do you want to do?
But I think
on the note.
okay. I think there's might be more.
I'm just saying, if you want to vote more, I'll just go.
So how would you like to approach these?
It's just around the dilution of the UAGC. I'm totally against it. So I want to see, yeah, I know that's a matter of principle. So, but if there's anything particular into these, that I understand the transition and things like that, but just there was some very substantial submissions around the use of the UAGC. We haven't even discussed it. I've tried to bring it up a couple of times, so I'm happy to go vote no. Just, look, you're probably gonna vote yes to it, but I'm just saying, it's about the specific point of dilution of the UAGC. And I specifically answered that question the other day to,
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by dilution, councillor.
but diluting when if it doesn't go up, it's getting diluted, don't worry, UAGC, it's getting less. So everybody pays less.
20.
So, and that's why I asked a specific question the other day in regards to transition, is it going to go up to 13%? I thought I got a yes out of that, obviously the transition, it's not. So,
Sorry, wasn't clear. Would
yeah,
we
no,
need to-
I understand now.
A and B, and break for lunch and come back and discuss that.
But I don't know where that specific, if there's anything specifically within here that involves the UAGC, or if they all do, that's fine.
Can I suggest we do just move A and B and break for lunch? We can come back and work on the more complicated part. So you're happy, Neville, to just move 5A and B at this stage?
No support for C at the moment, yes.
So move for A and B, we've got a second for A and B. We've got Alistair. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, no, carried. And what is the time? How long do you want for lunch?
Half an hour.
Half an hour?
20 minutes, councillors, can we?
20 minutes.
Sure.
Can we do 20 minutes?
Hungry, I'll do it up.
Go on.
Back at 10 past.
It's really your decision after that, but it would go down to, propose, go down to 120 plus 13%, so it would go to.
I'll hand over to Tony.
Thank you, Chair. I'm asking Stephen to discuss with us the UAGC and how it sits within the revenue fund. Online?
Yes, can I go?
Thank you.
So just, the Uniform Annual General Charge is part of how we allocate general rates. So there's a general rate that is on capital value, and then there's the UAGC that's a general rate that's paid by every rateable property in the district and the region. And in our revenue and financing policy, and this is a policy that's been in place for some time, the policy says in the general rates section, the Uniform Annual General Charge is a fixed rate per property that is part of the total general rates and is set at a level we consider appropriate. And then when we go to the section 1013B adjustment paragraph, again in the revenue and financing policy, it says the allocation of the rates liability between sectors of the rating base may be altered by the use of the UAGC. This may modify the amount of the UAGC during the term of the LTP to reflect the change in benefit or to achieve better community outcomes or well-being. So those are the two policy statements we have in the revenue financing policy, and that has served council well. You may recall that Federated Farmers asked that we have a list of activities that fund the UAGC, and that is what some councils have done. But when we changed the policy, or when we rewrote the revenue and financing policy a couple of LTPs ago, we gave ourselves lots of flexibility to do whatever we want. And other councils, there are other councils in the country that do that. So they don't specify specific activities that are funded by the UAGC, but they specify that they use the UAGC as a tool to modify the allocation of the general rate between a fixed rate and a variable rate. So I just wanted everyone to understand what our current policy is before you have the conversation. The other thing is we get to make this decision every year, and we get to make this decision as part of the rating fizz. So it's technically not part of our revenue and financing policy review, but because of the substantive changes we're making in the rates, it sort of comes into our review as a matter considering is the UAGC the appropriate amount, and it can be any number from 0 up to 30%. of the rates. So I'll stop there.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Just ask Stephen to point out that it is a year-by-year decision. What Stephen did point out is that the policy actually, I was quoting, our current policy says that we use the UAGC and we add the average rate, the average rate increase. But that's actually not written. That's custom and practice, as he's pointed out, that we developed. So the councillors are free to decide on the UAGC in total. We've never focused on a percentage of total rates as being the reason to move the UAGC. We've looked at where the UAGC sits in the total basket of general rates. And as I said, the suggestion in the transition is that instead of going up and instead of going down, that we maintain it, thinking that that would be an acceptable transition path. And that's the proposal. If the councillors want to revisit that and change it, or wish to future change it, they're entitled to do that. I would steer away from trying to break up our activities into little pieces and allocating them to the UAGC. The reason we moved away from that is it's incredibly arbitrary. It's very, very difficult to say that 5% of this activity and 10% of that activity equals something. And the more often you have more arbitrary decisions like that, the less people trust the system, because how did you come up with that number? So some councils have that still have that method. Others go with a percentage. We have tended to agree on the UAGC we had in 2018, and we've moved it up to keep it in line with the rates, and that's seemed to be acceptable to most. The reason it was proposed to come down in this whole transition, well, not the transition, the proposal, was something of the massive shift we were proposing to undertake in rates burden. We are moving 8% of the rates away from the rural rate sector into the rural sector into the general commercial sector. And we're moving some of that onto the residential sector. Not purposely, but by the way, it's an outcome of flattening the rates. And using the UAGC as a lever was suggesting that if you just take it down a bit, then it helps balance that up. And we were aiming for that bell curve. And that's the reason that it was proposed at 120, and it's the same reason we're proposing not to shift it at this point.
So just to recap, in recent years, we have moved in line with the percentage increase, but the discussion we had earlier when we were going to go to 100% capital, that actually reduced it from what it is at the moment. If we go to 50% for relativity, it would need to come up again, I guess, to have that same relativity of the sort of hearing. Or if we put if say it's 30% rise, we would do the 13%, which. Yeah.
So next year, Chair, in year 2, because the rate samples you've got in front of you were deliberately calculated with the UAGC at 143 to what did I say earlier, to mute the impact and offset, thank you, ameliorate.
Yeah, very good. Thesaurus in your brain.
I don't pull them out often. So to reduce the impact, it's on the table for the councillors to decide. I would just suggest that you would have to remodel these to see where the impacts are going to lie if you change it again.
So can I just clarify, are people clear about the numbers? That's the question.
I'm not sure people are clear. Are you clear what the number will be if we make the decisions we're about to make? If you look at some of those lines on the particular things, you've got current 143, proposed in the consultation 120, proposed with adjusted budget 120, transition with adjusted budget was 143, and current policy adjusted budget 162. Paul.
I am a little bit confused because I was listening to Stephen, with regards to the revenue and finance policy where it said, and correct me if I'm wrong, the UAGC can go up to 30% of the general rate. But what we're talking about is we haven't determined what percentage we're sitting at the moment.
22.
22. And
Under the current policy, 22.
and if you go to the next year, what will we be at?
14 or 15.
Okay. So what if we stay at 30?
And you already said.
Well, no, the reason I'm saying is because what I'm hearing from Jeremy and others is, if it's this amount, why don't we go up by 13% if the rates go up? Is that right, Jeremy? That's actually not the calculation we're entitled to
Doesn't
do
go
it by, I suppose.
It doesn't add 13%, 22%. It's just purely, if it stayed at where it is with 13% or there's the 162 versus it goes up $20, $19 per rating unit. But that's why I had asked the question last week, but okay, well, we're just going to carry on staying with UAGC with it. That's where I realised once, if you leave it at 143, you're basically reducing by 13%. I don't know, that's what the mathematical calculation is. So that's where I was talking about diluting it down. So you can't even think it'd be 14, 15% or something of our take.
I honestly haven't recalculated it since the proposal, but it was in the teens. I think we put it out on that. We did put it out on the rating samples.
So that figure would be on the 13.5%, 13.4 that was in the.
Yeah, 162.
Which was 162.
Yeah.
John.
So just to clarify, the UHC goes down to 120 in year 2 through the transition.
Year 2 is yet to be decided. If we continue with our customer practice, year 2 would be $120 plus 13%, which would be $135.
I guess I was just probably going to make an observation. The rural sector certainly challenged the UHGC. I think trying to look at a balance, the capital value supports the rural sector more than any other, and I think we need to make sure we're balanced when we come to this and making sure that we're not completely offsetting the land. And I think the UHGC is something that certainly affects households. So I'm comfortable with a little bit of softening in that space, considering where the shift is going. I just don't think that overall message has been done or understood very well.
I've been understood. I think the policy position hasn't changed on the 30%. 30%, to be clear, Chair, would be over $200. Which is an enormous change.
I'm having difficulty hearing you there at the moment.
I'm saying 30% would be over $200, which is an enormous change from. Well, considering the rating, the average rate is starting at 320 this year.
There will be a reduction on the other side though.
Oh, there is a reduction,
So
but not a
it's
policy.
not just all goes on, it
No,
comes
but-
off, so.
Yeah, so there's an adjustment, but it's significant.
Well, it's worth Lyndall.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Sorry, I haven't really got my thoughts together because I've got power overload from lunch. To support John's points, really, the UAGC, rural community did say just, it's more fair and so everybody should pay it. But actually, sorry, a lot of the submissions, not everybody. If you're on a fixed income of, it could be even $1,000 actually, in a small community, the impact of a change in the UAGC is really, really significant, as far as its actual figures. A $5 change for a business is very, very different to a $5 change for somebody who chooses whether they eat or turn the heater on. The UAGCs are often referred to as being more fair because everybody pays the same because everybody's getting those benefits. And I get that, absolutely. But I'm not sure that fair is the right word for that. You know, I certainly know that a lot of our constituents are seem to be will be perhaps disproportionately affected either way, up or down. So just mindful of that while we're talking about, you know, 120 or 143 or 135. The impact without changing the UAGC is still big for some of those communities, and so I'm a little resistant on keeping the 143 for year one. But I also completely understand the reasoning for that. In terms of my constituents, I would have to say, well, I'm not sure about that actually. Probably could be a bit lower things to smooth that transition.
Look, I'll take Neville first, then myself. Go Neville.
Yeah, we've had consistent information on the UAGC right from the beginning of our discussions. And we haven't questioned it to any great extent. We have talked about fairness. I'm just wondering, are we proposing today that we're going to change it? Is that why we're having this discussion?
Clear that, I just get questioned every time it comes up, so I don't know.
Why are we having this discussion at this point? Could you clarify that?
Look, I think we're having this discussion because where we were sitting before was going 100% capital value. We're now saying we're transitioning, doing 50. We've had a policy for the last few years of increasing it by the amount of the overall right. So if it's say it's 13% or it's 12.5, I'm reasonably comfortable with leaving it at that stage. You could have a longer discussion before it comes up every year. You can look at it again next year, but I think personally I would say, as we've heard in the policy, it can be used, you know, to smooth things out a bit, to make things fairer, and it'd be interesting to see the change. But we're not talking a lot of dollars to do the 13%. It's consistent with what we've been doing, and yeah, I'm reasonably comfortable with doing that. The reason it was going to come down was because that was to smooth the move to 100% when we're saying now 50%. So with that in mind, I'd be happy with going with the annual percentage. Jeremy.
The reason why we're discussing it is because I did ask the question last week because I knew it was, I just wanted to know the percentage increase. So, and I'm not, whether miscommunication, that's fine. So that's why I've asked it now to clarify. That's why we're having the discussion, and that's open the discussion for say, why is it setting at where it is? And I mean, vote saying keep it as it is, that's fine. But I've got to put it there because there were submissions that were pretty strong about the substance to it. So that's why we're discussing. That's the idea of deliberations. Everybody can have their point of view. I understand totally what Lyndall says in regards to the towns and rural. I mean, most of my constituents are in towns, but I still think it's a principal thing around that it's a great tool to say everybody benefits from a lot of this stuff. So that's all the answer.
I've got Tanya, then Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking for some clarity. So the transition proposal recommends $143, which is what this council is saying is too high. This council over here is saying is too low, but I was confused about your statement about keeping it with the average increase, because that is not in the proposal this year. The transition proposal was keeping the UAGC at the same dollar level this year and reverting to the.
It's not going up.
Yeah. But it was going to go down, and now it's not.
Go down.
And I liked it going down.
The $20 either way, and it actually changes the models quite a lot.
But it doesn't smooth.
If we start to change them right now.
I've got Morris and Paul.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, well, I don't really understand why Jeremy, who's a very fair person, is trying to promote this, you know, as a to stick the UAG 3 up. And Andrew Morrison is another person who I greatly admire, is also, you know, saying that too. So I don't really understand why they are doing it when it clearly is, it disproportionately affects the rate payments. You know, the people who are on a low capital value, it's 5 or 10% of their rates bill, whereas somebody who's got a $5 million farm, you can't even measure it hardly. So it's you know, the difference to people who have got a high capital value is virtually nothing, but the difference to people who've got hardly anything is really big, and it affects them a lot. So.
Thanks, Morris. Paul.
No, I was just relating back to Jeremy asked a question in an email to all of us, and you replied and said, please do ask the questions again tomorrow meeting. We went over a few of those things there as well. So it is disproportionate because we're moving to capital. That's
disproportionate, yeah.
Yes, but more so. So you've got here is if the status quo policies are maintained, no change at all to rates policy, the UAGC would be 162, which is 143 plus 13%. So yeah, that's saying if the status quo goes there. So it's just clarifying, I believe, exactly what Jeremy's asked in his email. Now he's asked for him to come back and ask that again, which he has, and now we're having the discussions.
Right, it's about as clear as mud. You're saying that the status quo is 143 for this year. That could change next year. How many are happy with that? It looks like we've probably got a majority who. You want to make another comment?
No, I'd say it's staying what it is now, so people are not getting any increase in that.
Right, that seems to clear. I think people are universally unhappy about that, so we're sticking with status quo.
Please brought it up and discuss.
Yeah.
And that will be the end of it.
See you back in 12 months' time.
You're whining.
Of the armed and dangerous moment.
No, nobody.
Given that we need to prepare
Yeah,
documents, I think I'd like absolute clarification on every matter.
Okay,
Can we please
all
be
in
really
favour
clear?
of the status quo, which to be clear is 143 for this current year, raise their hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, clear majority. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, those against. So
I don't think it was for the same reason though.
It doesn't matter, you're against it.
Doesn't matter.
Just let the public know that they voted for me.
Thank you.
CD and E, the recommendations.
people happy to move moving CD, or do you want to go?
Yes.
That probably solves a lot of those issues.
I'll move it, we'll see if there's any.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Further discussion on CD and E. Now this is a reasonable discussion on that before lunch, and was that my understanding was it was the animal uniform charge was the one issue we need to clarify. If there's no more discussion on that, I will.
So can we just be clear so that we can get a vote on this, that we have the vote on the UAGC? So notwithstanding that matter which we have recorded 2 negative votes for, can we vote for the rest of this excluding the UAGC?
Yep, sounds right.
Otherwise,
Basically, I've got to vote against it.
The rest of the matters. So I'd like us to focus on the matters that are here to do with transition. We understand your votes on the UAGC, so those will be recorded. So can we vote on these matters?
Yes, I understand.
Setting
Yes.
UAGC aside, because we have your vote on
done it,
this.
yes.
Otherwise, I will have to record 2 votes against everything else.
Understood.
So we're clear, so, yeah, so this is now separate. We've
Yes.
had a motion,
Yes.
it's clear that
Yes.
we're now voting on C, D and E. We've had a motion moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on C for starts? So that's, the planning moving to 100% general rate, the river management going to 50% general rate, and the flood protection targeted rate going to 100%. With the ability to look at in the following year, being able to look at changes. Okay, any further discussion?
No change to the wire.
And no change to the wire, yes.
So do we get clarification? Phil asked a question around other assets that were owned by the company in the Moya, that was ring fence, i.e. cogeneration and stuff. Was that answered to Phil?
Sorry, I didn't
So
quite
the
hear
Meridian
it.
stuff.
So the power generation's not in the wire subkitchen. Some TI.
But the implications of the 96 agreement being null and void are the reasons that we are leaving it the same this year. Well,
The power generation was, it's not in the wire catchment. Yeah.
So we're all clear?
We're just clear the 2-year transition, and we're obviously going back to the public. That is confirmed that we do that next year. Is that right?
Annual plans.
And the annual plan that if we to change, or we agree to that, that's a done deal.
My understanding from what we heard earlier was that more work needs to be done on the
Deliberations, I don't want it to be silent. It is part of the transition.
The two months and then
That becomes C6, doesn't it?
Yeah, but if we can add that, please.
So Jamie, you're on that.
Jane, can you just read that out? Read it back?
The transition proposal is that the biosecurity and land sustainability rate be moved from currently 100% land value to 50% land value, 50% CV, and in year 2, move to 100% CV.
Oh, see, okay, thank you.
We're all clear on what we're voting on? So that has been moved and seconded. I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. All falls no.
I move recommendation 6 and 7, Chairman.
So
Non-controversial.
Monica, did you move C, D and E, or did you just move C?
Yeah, C, D and E.
Okay.
Anyway.
I think that was C, D and E.
And we are.
Motion was C, D and E.
Mr. Chair, I just want to check. We have just gone back live, so did we miss the vote live?
Yes, you did.
Yes, so would you just care to restate the vote for the vote?
The motion that I proposed was seconded by Oscar was to approve C, D and E in the paragraph part 5.
Yes, thank you.
Moved and seconded. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no. All would like is no recorded. The motion is carried.
And I move then to recommendations 6 and 7, Chairman.
It was moving
Yep.
6 and 7. Seconded by Lyndall. So just to be clear, that's to direct the chief executive to use resolutions relating to recommendations 3 to 5 to prepare the final 2024-34 long-term plan and supporting documents for review by the council at an extraordinary meeting of council to be held on the 19th of June 2024, and to undertake a full review of the use of reserves during the 24-25 year and update the relevant policies accordingly to inform future annual plans and long-term plans. So it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? No. Unanimous. Okay, so We'll bring to the end there.
Nice reading for.
Yep.
Fees and charges.
So community fees and charges, come through along with other matters that were consulted on but don't specifically relate to the finalisation of the RTP documents to the meeting next week. There's a couple of, well, first of all, there is an inflation recommendation from staff and a couple of other minor recommendations, plus some further information in response to submitted inquiries that will come from next week.
Okay,
So that wouldn't have further discussion because
so two
certainly
separate things that we can, it's almost separate, like we can
Yeah, it's
deliberate on those if
concurrent
need be.
consultation as opposed to being part of the LTP. That's
clear, we're happy.
Sorry.
I believe I can declare the deliberations meeting closed, and thank you for your fulsome and vigorous debate of the various issues.